We're relieved.
So Laura, it looks like we have a public comment person on the phone who wants to comment on the consent agenda. And interestingly, our consent agenda is at the end of this meeting. So what I'm hoping maybe the easiest way to handle this is if someone, when they make a motion of an item 1C to approve the agenda, that when we approve the consent part, we move that up so he can get his comment in and not have to wait for several hours. So I'm not sure who wants to handle that, but just to reiterate.
I had all this stuff open and somebody else, here we go.
I got to the computer.
Have we officially started the meeting?
We have not. I'm waiting for Dr. Rudolph here.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see. Okay, this is what Allende sent yesterday. I don't see the consent agenda on here. So would it be the email that Kathy sent that we're looking for?
Yeah, yeah. Item 4 and the email from Kathy has the full agenda.
I'm happy to make that motion unless somebody else wants to. I just don't have it. I'm struggling here.
Kathy sent it on the 16th.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to find that email.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, we are streaming live now, everybody.
Okay.
So, and then I have one item I need to pull off of the agenda.
Okay, so if we're all ready, yep. I haven't started the meeting officially. So at 9:08, we'll begin this meeting of the Mountain View Westminster School District Board of Trustees. It's called to order, and I guess we will all stand for the pledge.
I don't have my flag with me.
Okay, perfect.
We can look at you, Ellen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Thank you, everyone.
I found one.
Can I get a roll call, please?
Ellen Wheeler.
Blakely. Laura Blakely.
Jose Gutierrez Jr.
Devin Conley.
And Tamara Wilson. Let the record reflect that all 5 trustees are present. And we will move on now to approval of the agenda. And I believe we have a few changes are requested.
So I move to approve the agenda, but moving the consent agenda item 1 or 4, the whole consent agenda item 4 in front of item 2, review and discussion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Everybody have to pull.
Oh, there was an item that we wanted pulled from consent as well. I apologize. There was something, I believe it's item B1.
Okay.
Sorry, I shouldn't have asked you.
Some of the language has changed in the schooling services contract, so we just need to pull that. We'll bring it back at the next board meeting.
So I modify my motion to pull item 4, the consent agenda, in front of item 2, review and discussion, and pull entirely 4B. So item 4, the consent agenda, will only consist of item A, the personnel report.
Perfect. Can I get a second?
Or the person who seconded approve the modified version.
Ellen?
Yes.
Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, on a motion moved by Trustee Blakely and seconded by Trustee Wheeler, the consent agenda has been now moved before item, is it 2? And
2.
Item B1 has been pulled. So now we will move on to item 2, a review and discussion and welcome and introductions.
You have to approve the consent agenda now. You have a public comment on it. So
that's right. I'm
move
sorry.
That one up to item 2. So now you're going to go for the approval of the personnel report, which is what the public comment is. And then you have to approve the contracts.
Thank you. I think I need another. Hold on. I'll get you through this. I promise. Okay, so we're moving now that we're on the consent agenda. I believe at this time, before we do the approval, we want to go to public comment. So I believe Mr. Jones is on the phone to make a comment on our consent agenda item, personnel report.
Personnel report. So you're on 2A now, which is personnel report.
Right.
Caller, you have been admitted into the meeting to make a public comment.
We don't hear the audio.
They need to unmute themselves. They're not muted right now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rudolph, and thank you, Ms. Wilson, for your consideration in moving this up. That was nice of you to think of that. This is Adam Jones. I'm the parent of an 8th grade student at Crittenden, and I wanted to speak to this item today because I'm concerned about the administrator appointments and the process for transitioning administrators from interim or substitute positions to permanent status. Having spoken with other parents and students, I know I'm not alone in feeling that the needs of the school community are not really considered in these hiring decisions. So based on that, I wanted to make 4 specific requests. First, please get the input of parents, students, and teachers about the traits and skills required for new administrators when beginning the recruiting process. So even before you have candidates, figure out what people need. 2, please include students, parents, and teachers on interview panels and heed their input when making hiring decisions. 3, when making a determination if a temporary administrator should be offered a permanent position, please survey all the stakeholders in writing and group discussions about the effectiveness of the employee during the transitional time. 4, when interim and substitute administrators are added to fill vacancies mid-year, the district should still post the permanent positions in March. This would allow you to get applications from a much larger pool of qualified people who are available for school year appointments starting in July. Most excellent candidates are not out of work and do not want to break contracts in the middle of the year. I've seen these actions work extremely well at other schools where my children have been enrolled. Collaborative processes allow districts to hire more suitable administrators and create buy-in from existing stakeholders. They also indicate to the newly hired staff members that they are accountable to students, parents, and teachers. In general, it seems that the MVWSD site administrators I have encountered are underqualified. They are incapable of fostering positive school spirit, unwilling to participate in collaborative decision-making, unfamiliar with the California Ed Code and district policies, and not interested in building personal connections with students. I beg you to reject this personnel order. You need to revisit the hiring process for administrators to stop the revolving door from spinning and put students first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your public comment. Are there any comments from trustees?
Yes.
Trustee Gutierrez?
Yeah, Dr. Rudolph, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you already respond to this through email? And if so, can we have your response be written into the public record?
We responded to the request that the personnel report was added incorrectly. And so that's what our response was. We didn't respond to his particular concern.
Oh, so when the email came in, that wasn't addressed?
No, it was simply about that he felt the personnel report had too many changes, and which is why we brought it back. And
Okay.
it didn't allow the public to the opportunity to look at it, which could possibly be a Brown Act violation. And so by adding it again, we satisfied that request.
I see. So can I ask of you, please, if you can please, and I know you've already stated this before, we've already discussed this before in public session as well, but could you please explain the appointment process of these persons and how it was that came into being?
So in both of these cases, and I believe his criticism actually is about the Ms. Walsh, who is at Crittenden, who served as a substitute administrator mid-year, and then continued on. And so sort of the commentary about how do we collect feedback. We did talk with representative groups, but we did not pull in an interview panel because all the feedback that we had received from representative groups was very positive. Teachers, sort of representatives in terms of PTA councils and other parents that had talked. We can obviously make sure that we, next time around adhere to it. And that's perfectly fine. I think for Miss Walsh in this case, she's been in our district for in some type of leadership capacity for close to 20 years, and is respected well by her peers, and which is one of the reasons why I felt very comfortable with moving her from substitute to actual administrator, especially because she's been an instructional coach probably for about, I think, the last 4 or 5 years. But I think it is a valid point. I'm not trying to discount Mr. Smith's concern about doing an interview panel. And so we can definitely look at that, especially with interim and substitute positions moving forward.
Sure. And can you please address the issue in terms of how we appointed our administrators at Graham Middle School, please?
So in this case, we placed, earlier this year, we actually did look for administrators. We tried to get ahead of the game. And so we did put out the possibility of creating a pool. We've done this now for the last 2 to 3 years. And we found a couple good candidates within the pool over the last couple of years. When Mr. Hermosillo announced his resignation, we provided additional support. Mr. Petraea, actually, who was a sitting principal, was providing support in the Ed Services Department because Director Smith had went on a maternity leave, or not maternity leave.
Medical leave.
I think it was health.
Medical.
Yeah.
She went on medical leave. Sorry. And so as a result of that, we looked to provide additional supports for Graham. And again, in this case, she was received very positively by staff, by students, and by families. And considering her experience, both as a middle school principal, as a middle school administrator, and as an elementary principal, we felt very comfortable with placing her in there, especially considering that we had did the earlier look for the interview pool and didn't see anyone that was out there that we felt like really met our standards and that could drive the change that we want to see and that parents have been asking for over at Graham. And I think considering, especially in the case of Graham, we've heard a lot of parents who have talked about the need for our highest performing students to be pushed and the need to make sure that everyone is included. You have a former GATE coach and teacher who's also been an administrator, who's worked in Woodside, so she understands a lot of the dynamics that come for Graham. And so we felt very comfortable that she had the right qualifications to move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Thank you, Madam President Wilson.
Thank you. Any other questions from trustees? Okay, can I get a motion, please?
So is this a motion for personnel or for consent?
Consent, which only consists now of personnel.
Okay,
You got to. Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, on a motion moved by Trustee Wheeler and seconded by Trustee Gutierrez, the consent agenda passes unanimously. And we will now move on to new item 3, review and discussion, and move to 3A, welcome and introductions.
So just FYI, we still have the caller on the line?
Yeah, he is, but he is muted by, I'm the host, so I have him muted.
Okay.
All right, so I would like to introduce our 2 facilitators today, Terilyn Finders and Peter Fagan. I know that some of you have experiences with them and you sort of know who they are. I will let them introduce themselves. You have both, I know we have a lot of lawyers now on this phone call, but we also have in Terilyn, a former board member, as well as a communication experts, and their firm does a lot of great work across the district or across the state. And so I'm going to turn it over to them because they are facilitators for today.
Peter,
Peter, do you want to open? You're on. You
Sure.
were muted.
Yes, I was thanking them very much for the opportunity to be here, and then I realized no one can hear me, so I needed to unmute first. But again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. As Dr. Rudolph said, Terrelyn and I do a lot of governance retreat and workshops all across the state, and it's always an honor to work with the leadership team of a school district to help address issues that you may be facing in your district. And I don't know if the caller is still on, but whether or not someone is listening, I just to introduce the whole workshop concept. The workshop is not like a normal board meeting where you're working your way through agenda items and having discussion and then taking a vote to approve or not. This is an opportunity really for the entire board to provide feedback and direction to the superintendent. The board has one employee who is the superintendent, and the board gives direction, appropriate direction, only through its board majority. And so it's not often that you get the opportunity to just sit down with the superintendent and the whole leadership team and with all 5 board members and provide that direction. Usually it's coming throughout the week with individual phone conversations or something like that. And that doesn't necessarily always represent direction from a majority of the board, which is the way direction is supposed to come to your CEO. So always look forward to these opportunities and to work with the group dynamic and hopefully leave things in an improved state. Not saying that they're bad, but people and groups can always improve. And so that's what we're here for. Terrelyn?
Well, good morning. It's nice to see you, Ellen. You recall we worked together quite a while ago on a budget issue, and you came to us as both a board member and a leader at the League of Women Voters. So Ellen and I have a little bit of history. I'm delighted to be with you, and I share with you, might come as no surprise, this is a first for me. I have not facilitated a retreat through a virtual platform, a video meeting before. I'm thinking that now CSBA's board member training might have a virtual component, so we all get used to these meetings, how to take comment, move from closed to open, how to micro read body language where we don't have each other in the same room. So I guess I get to thank you for being a first, and you'll be in my book. There you go. So a little bit of information on my background, and then we want to hear from you. This is your retreat. I want to say I applaud your superintendent for wanting to have this time with you, because we are, as a board, the boss. He wants some time with his boss to hear your thoughts on priorities and direction as you move into a new normal for 2021. I would have said 2021, but we've all been told we have to complete the 2020. So anyway, so just a teeny bit of information on my background. I'm an import into education. I was a reporter. I covered education for a period of time, and then I ran for the board. I think when I decided to run for the board, my superintendent gulped, because he thought, why is a reporter who's been sitting in my meetings and covering us running for, what carpet is she going to rip up and what's she looking for? But I in my 3 terms on the board, I learned to become a good board member, I believe. And part of that is working together as a team to set the direction. So this is a funky time for us. You know, man, it was 1 month ago, we heard shelter in place. And prior to that, we were thinking, do we have a field trip or not have a field trip? Will we have the assembly or not have the assembly? I'm sneezing, should I not be in a meeting? Which I believe we were supposed to be in a meeting over a month ago. And I called Kathy and said, I'm sneezing and they might not want to be with me. So here we are, looking at the academic year not concluding the way we wanted it to. Teachers missing kids, kids missing teachers, and so forth. And we're moving into a new year. So we're delighted to facilitate this discussion for you. We'll get into a little bit of housekeeping at the end, but the primary focus will be you setting direction for your superintendent as you move into 2021. Not new goals, just what you're hearing from the public. So let me make that point clear and then turn to you. We will have a question for you. We're not rewriting your plan. If we were, that's what the agenda would read, because we would notify the public. What we're talking about is what you're hearing. You're the voice of the community. You bring the voice of the community into the discussion. So he needs to hear from you what he should be focusing on as he's readying for the next year. So with that, Peter and I would love to hear from each of you, and I will start with the president and just ask how long you've been on the board, and just give us a little bit of information that will help us guide the discussion.
Thank you, Terilyn. Thank you, Peter. So my name is Tamara Wilson. I'm the current board president of the district. This is my 4th year as a trustee. My background is more in science and academics. I'm a research scientist at the U.S. Geological Survey over at Moffett Field, NASA Ames. I have done some teaching, but at the college level, and so I have a little bit of background in curriculum development. But it's been a steep learning curve being a board member in this first term, but I've really enjoyed the role, and I think we have a really good functioning team, which I'm really proud of.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
And I'll just ask you to, when, since we don't have body language, maybe if you could just pass it to another trustee. I don't want to call anybody out of order. I'm not sure what the...
I think what I'll do is alphabetical, because it's sort of agnostic, if trustees don't mind, and I'll do it. I should do it by first name because that's what I'm seeing, but this will be a good test of my memory. I believe it would go to Laura Blakely. Unless anyone objects, we'll do last names. It's just a way easier to facilitate in this platform.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for facilitating for us. It's a privilege to have you with us. I'm Laura Blakely. My day job is as a commercial loan transactional attorney, much less sexy than some of the school stuff. I've been on the board, like Tamara, this is my 4th year, so nearing the end of my first term. And my kids are both, well, one's in college, mad that he's not in college right now, but and one recently graduated, so both boys went through the district. And I was very involved with the Educational Foundation, and took on a lot of roles while I was in the district, task forces, that sort of thing. We had an interesting board member before, and I decided that I was going to join, or I was going to run, because I was hopeful that we would have a higher functioning team. And like Tamara, I'm really pleased. We've come a long way together, the 5 of us, and looking forward to seeing what's next. Nobody ever thought we'd be having this conversation today. So, and I will pass the board. Okay, so I'm looking at you, Devin. Devin Conley, right? So
Yes.
C comes after B.
Hi, I'm Devin Conley. I'm in my 2nd year on the board, and I have a background as a teacher. I also worked in education policy research for about 5 years. So I've been in education for almost 18 years. I have a 1st grader in the school district as well.
Nice to meet you.
And I will pass to Jose Gutierrez Jr.
Thank you, Trustee Conley. So I'm Jose. I've been on the board 5 years. I was appointed back in 15, ran in 16, luckily won, and nearing the end of my first term. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to have partners like Laura and Tamara. When we first joined, it was a little different. We've come a long way since then. I'm happy to be partnering with Ellen Wheeler and Devin Conley. And together as a board, I believe that we like to agree to disagree in a cordial way. And we can express our differences without fearing any blow-ups like there used to be in years past, which is, it goes without saying that should be always the normal, right? But, people are people. We're all different. What matters now, though, is that in the last 4 years, along with our new superintendent who's been here now, 4 years, or close to 5, actually, our standards are different and they're higher for ourselves as a board and our expectations within the community. And I like to think that we've been able to grow year in and year out, and understand not only the needs of the community, but also be able to express those as best as we can when we're in our capacities as trustees, either as individuals or as a board. So having said that, I thank everyone's time and patience and contributions as team members, and Dr. Rudolph for being our superintendent. So I think Ms. Wheeler's next.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Ellen Wheeler. I'm a retired attorney in the sexy area of family law, and also a retired teacher, and also very involved with League of Women Voters, as you mentioned. Carolyn, you mentioned that you were on a school board for 3 terms. What school board was that?
I should have mentioned that. Thank you. I served in Las Virgenes. That's the northwest pocket of LA County, right up against Ventura County. I now live in Northern California and in Livermore, and my grandchildren are in the Livermore public school system. So I just thought I'd offer a shout out there for my pal Kelly Bowers. But I was Las Virgenes, which is 2 comprehensive high schools, a continuation high school, 3 middle schools. Actually, while I was on the board, we built the 3rd middle school, much to the chagrin of the people who did not want it in their backyard. 8 elementaries, and one of the first preschools built around the notion of special education. So it was quite a while ago, and that's where I served. Thank you for asking.
And I'm the veteran on this board. I've been on the board for almost 18 years.
The anchor.
Well, thank you all for sharing those introductory comments and giving us an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. And Jose, I really appreciated your kind of recap of the time that you've been on the board and kind of where it came from and the steps that have been taken and improvements that have been made. And one of the things that I always emphasize during these workshops is that I've looked at your mission and vision. They look great. I love a short mission statement that is short and direct and clear. The vision is excellent. I've looked at your goal areas. But as a leadership team, one of the primary things that you need to be concerned about is enhancing the public's confidence in school district leadership. And the school district leadership is you all and the superintendent, the leadership and governance team. And it sounds like you've been doing that over the last few years. And so I would commend you for that. And you'll probably hear me say that maybe 2 or 3 more times before we're done here, because it's a point that I think is worth repeating so that people remember it as you're making your decisions and running things through the lens of your mission and vision statement. But really, as you're interacting with each other, is the way that you enhance the public's confidence in school district leadership, is the way that you work with each other as a team to accomplish what's best for the students in your district. But with that, I'm going to ask a question. I believe you may have had a heads up about this question, so you've had a chance to think about it. But what lasting and positive changes do you think might come to education from this pandemic experience? So we can run through this with the same order, Tamara, if you're ready to start.
Yeah, I can start. I haven't had a whole lot of time to put thought into this. I think we just received some of this recently. But I think having heard from other parents and folks in different districts, and even at different grade levels. So we're K-8. I've heard people, they're like, oh, within week 2, we were already on distance learning and online, but they're an alternative high school. So, and I didn't realize apparently a lot of alternative high schools do most of their stuff remotely anyway. So it gets very challenging to parse out who's already had what ready to roll from the get-go and what actual kind of students are serving and what their existing platforms were. But to circle back, my thought is that the lasting and positive experience I think that will come out of this is this whole organizational collaboration to sort of change wholesalely how we deliver education. Even if it's just temporarily, we have to move to a very new and different and often uncomfortable style of delivering instruction online to kids. And I think It's going to be a challenge. I think we're up to the challenge, but I think the lasting experience from this could be that we may have to do some of this into the foreseeable future. I mean, there's so many unknowns. We don't know if we have to do staggered classroom times moving forward. And would that mean, half of the day kids are online and half the other are doing in-person instruction? So I think there's a lot of things we're going to have to consider as we're making decisions moving forward, but I think it will make for a more holistic and more fluid organization and more fluid educational system of delivery, if you will, moving forward. With that, I'm going to pass it off, and maybe we can circle back on this twice. I'd like to give other people opportunities to talk and build off of that. So we'll move on to Laura.
My thoughts are not fully coalesced, but one of them is the importance of emergency planning and contingency plans. And, we had some, there's earthquake stuff, shooter drills, excuse me, for certain things that we had foreseen, but the possibility of, hopefully we'll never actually see them. But this is like a brave new world. And we probably should have, the federal government theoretically had been planning for this and then never prioritized it significantly enough. So I think just the critical importance of having an emergency plan and something that is some of that may just be process that's flexible enough, because they're probably, I don't know what we could think of that we hadn't thought of that would be more significant than this, but something could happen. And so trying to have the process and the procedures in place so that you can adapt and move forward, just that framework, I think that's really important. And I imagine that we'll be better prepared. I feel like we were better prepared than many districts, but still, it's all relative. Another thing that I hope will come out of this is a more generic community appreciation for the importance and the talent and the gift of what teachers do on a daily basis, and the staff, the whole framework and infrastructure that we have that supports those teachers. So from the teachers to the principals to the district administration. We've gotten emails from all over, and I'm sure every school board member everywhere has, but from one end to I have to work from 9 to 3 and you need to babysit my kid and you need to program them for 6 hours so that I can work, to other people oh, my poor child is just so fraught and distressed by all this that we can't possibly do any learning. But I think on either side of the equation, people are appreciating their teachers and appreciating what the schools do beyond just the delivery of sort of instructional content, like science or math or reading. And part of that, I think another piece of it is sort of self-regulation skills and the importance of sort of social emotional learning. Everybody, every parent, and every individual that's living through this shelter in place, we've all had to get more comfortable with ourselves and with the people that we live with, and just structure our days and move forward, right? It's easy to just sit there. I got sucked in by a jigsaw puzzle for a week. And it's okay, I got to put that aside because I'm not getting any of the other things I need to get done. But I think for kids in particular, we do have some SEL components of learning, but weaving that across the educational content, I think will be important because this, kids could get sick, things happen. So that's important. And then the last thing that I would say is everyone wants to help. And we've got lots of people trying to help in ways that they think will be helpful. And some of them are, some of them aren't, but sort of collaboration with parents in the community. And I don't know what that looks like yet. Historically, we've had PTAs at a school or the classroom helpers for a teacher. And, the educational foundation runs across the district, but there's all different kinds of pieces, and it involves a lot of different players and volunteer groups and nonprofits. And I'm hopeful that out of this we'll come up with some kind of better framework for the community to collaborate and help in ways that are truly helpful. So we're not to diminish the intent behind the offers of help that we've had, but somehow or another that needs to be coordinated. So those are my takeaways. And I guess I pass it to Devin.
Sounds great. Thank you, Laura. On the comment about teachers, I absolutely agree. I think that this situation is highlighting the important role that our teachers do play and how talented and committed and compassionate and skilled they are. Because it's not easy to run a classroom of 25 to 30 students a day, let alone 1 or 2 students at home. So I hope that that appreciation of teachers continues, and the appreciation of, it's hard to replace one-on-one or in-person human interaction with a virtual setting. And so I think this really emphasizes how valuable our classrooms are. I also think this situation has highlighted all of the many roles that schools fill beyond just education. It's a place where students get food. It's a place where we have services like CHAC for social emotional well-being and counseling. There are sports and athletics. There's art and music and other performing arts. There are so many things that happen within our schools that even with distance learning, it's very hard to replace them. And schools are sort of institutional resource brokers that connect people to services within our community. And then finally, I think the global pandemic has emphasized the differences in wealth and in student achievement that were already present, but they're going to be exacerbated. And that exacerbation is a negative, but I think the thing that's positive coming out of that is that everyone's talking about it. People are aware of it. They're really focused on it. I have definitely come to see universal internet access as a human right because of this situation. And it's something that I'm advocating for at the county level right now, because we have so many people who can't do telemedical appointments, for example. They can't get online to apply for unemployment benefits. They can't get online, or they're having trouble getting online to do distance learning. So I think that the more we see internet access as a right, as a type of public infrastructure that we need to have, I'm hoping to see change in that area so that more people are connected.
Thank you. Jose, I think you're up next.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hand off well.
That's all right.
Nah, we're all good. I think that there's 2 things. The first thing that comes to mind is just the value of public education. We need to understand, and I think we have the chance now to look at how it is that school districts work. And we also need to remember that within our setting of the Silicon Valley, we have a lot of parents, so the expectations are from people that you need to do things now. Because you sent an email, or because you called, or because of this, or because of that. The expectations around the Google background, LinkedIn, Apple, the tech community in general is so different, the private sector, from public education. And not to say that we're not doing it right, but from our perspective, I think a thoughtful approach to problem solving has been displayed here now with how we're treating the COVID-19 pandemic situation within our school district community. I think better communicating in these instances, for example, what it is that districts can do based on what's mandated from the state during times of crisis is also important to understand, because if we're going to develop distance education or distance learning, we want to do this the best way possible that we can for the benefit of all students, whether they come from BUM, Huff, Castro, Mistral, understanding the differences in needs from special ed students, English language learners, and the community that we serve as a whole, because we're public education and we need to serve the needs of everyone. And if we're going to do something like we are now, it's going to be thoughtful, it's going to be deliberate, it's not going to be rushed into. And so bridging that gap in communication, like it has been said before, plus factoring in how it is that community members, if they wish to help out, how it is that they can help out, understanding the restrictions that exist within that world, because we also don't want parents and folks from the community, in this case, be exposed to being in the front lines needlessly, right? Or for whatever reason to help here or there and then have them get sick. That's of no use for anyone. That's of no benefit for them as individuals, or if they're parents, even more so, right? So we have to factor all that in. But the final thing I think is, and I've thrown a lot of stuff out there, so I apologize, but the final thing is, and it's been brought up before too, the digital divide has been brought up by some members of our community, like our former trustee, Steve Nelson, and other persons as well. We've talked about that too. But the one thing that I think sometimes people forget in these situations is the way you reveal yourself in terms of stress, the way you reveal yourself and interact with others, epitomizes the way you are going to be able to problem solve on the fly sometimes, right? And people mean well, but when they say, hey, you should ask Google for help, you should ask Apple for help. Well, we have been, right? But it's not just us that's asking for help. It's Santa Clara County. It's the state of California. It's the United States. It's the world as a whole, because they're all doing the same thing we are. So understanding what it is that we can do differently in the district to bridge that digital divide is important. Understanding how to provide internet access is important, but that's when new governance comes into play, right? Partnerships are important now more so than ever. I've been on this, Don Quixote challenge of raising the issue of partnerships and partnering with the city council and with Santa Clara County officials, so that we can try and look at these problems from a larger perspective with more resources to better problem solve and provide solutions that are real for everyone in the city of Mountain View and then for the county as a whole. That's a whole different level of governance that we're not exposed to, or we haven't, for whatever reason, until now, been trying it. So I think we need to partner up more with the city council to find out, and also with businesses with them to be able to, for example, provide this free Wi-Fi opportunity for everyone. Google, when they first came on board back in the day, had the free Wi-Fi availability for the city. In some parts it worked better than in others, but then all of a sudden, poof, it wasn't really there anymore, right? So those are just a few things that I've thought about. And in the end, what all that means is that we need to learn how to work together better. And in my, shortly, I'll be quick about this. I'm sorry, I tend to talk a lot. When I switched jobs, I'm at PayPal now. I'm lucky to be there. I can work from home. But they've got these priorities. Now, one of them is valuing the inclusion of diverse perspectives and personnel, right? Because everyone has something different to bring. So whether you're a senior VP or in my case, an IP patent litigation paralegal, working with in-house counsel, I can raise my opinion and concern just like my attorneys can and my VP. And in that respect, we're all equals, right? There's no distinction in terms of titles, because we're trying to help out to see what's in the best interest of the company. And I think that approach now is more important than ever within the life cycle of the school district, because we're all in this together and we need to work with one another and better understand what kind of values we can bring into play to help each other out. And I think that element of human patience and understanding, it's easily preached, but it's so hard to do. Ms. Wheeler.
Yes. So mine is quick. I'm hoping that this will help us understand and better utilize the promise of online learning and the promise that online learning can provide for differentiation.
Good point. Dr. Rudolph, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think the trustee sort of said it eloquently, right? That this has highlighted some disparities in equity for communities with diverse needs. And I think there are going to be some lasting impacts. I agree that I think teachers are going to be revered. How long that lasts will be kind of interesting, but I at least believe that we understand the work that they do a little bit more now that we have our kids at home. And just imagine if there were 30 of your kids sitting in a classroom with you all day. I think we would have even a more profound respect for them. But I also think that and this will probably go into something that we'll talk about a little bit later. I think there may be some fundamental changes that we have to make as a community, as a nation, and as a district that allow us to really leverage these technologies that we haven't thus far. And, to rethink, things like textbooks versus Chromebooks, internet, what that looks like. And so I think there's going to be a new rallying cry to sort of change some of these things. And I think online learning, I've taught online as a college professor. I've taken online and distance learning classes. In fact, my first distance learning class was watching PBS and answering questions. So it obviously it's evolved since then, but it's not perfect. And I think there's going to be a larger cry to fix those types of things. And I think it's incumbent upon us to find a way to make that work. But also, I will say, it's a natural fix for us to say, we need to just jump to online learning. But the reality is that not everyone, including myself, wants to sit on a screen all day long or wants to be cooped up in one particular place. And so I think the real challenge for us as we look at the diverse needs of all of our students in our community is how do we create a system that meets the needs of everyone? How do we provide flexible learning or distance learning at the same time give kids the opportunity to get the wiggles out? How do we, create learning experiences that are impactful, knowing that we learn best in groups when we're not next to each other physically? And I think those, and also, this one wasn't mentioned, but how do we help our kids master executive functions that exist within adults that allow us to engage in these types of formats and understand the social mores that exist. But, for kids who are 7 or 10, they don't really get those types of things. And I think these are going to be the lasting impacts of this. But I do fundamentally believe that our way of life will be different at the end of this in some type of fashion.
Great, thank you.
I want to thank all of you for your comments, and you're echoing one another in many ways, and you're also sharing different points of view, which allows me to point out the importance of today's discussion, because your superintendent, who is very eloquent and clearly very focused and focused on kids, works for a 5-headed boss. And so what we need to do from today's discussion is make sure that this professional has an opportunity to get one set of direction or many priorities perhaps, or many areas of focus, but that this body agrees. As Peter said, only the body sets the direction. I think one of the lasting impacts we have to avoid, one of the potential pitfalls, is that by being distanced from one another, we as governing body have to make sure that we're not becoming 5 different voices in our superintendent's ear. And I see you all nodding, you know what I mean, and that is not because I've heard that that's an issue with this board. I know it can be an issue with any board, and I think it's particularly challenging for us while we're distanced from one another. So I'm going to share with you a thought that I heard in your comments, and maybe will help us move into the next part of this discussion. But before we move on, and after I share my thought, and before we move on, I would like to hear from the others who've joined us. At least introduce yourselves and your function, because I'm not sure if my mom sent you here to just watch my manners online, because that would be something my mom would do. Yikes. But let me just share my thought before I turn it over for those introductions, if you don't mind. One of the things I'm hearing in what you're saying, though not put in these words, is personalized learning. Instruction, and not a wholesale swap of in-class for online, but blended tools that are going to help us. And I'm not on your board, but I'll share one of the lasting positives that I think might come from this. Someday a child might be home with strep throat, but perfectly capable of learning. And we'd be able to say, log on, jump on, you can keep learning. And maybe we don't have to be away from school for 3 days when we have an earache or something else is going on in life. This could be one other gap that we haven't really articulated, but that we could in the future bridge as a positive. It's clearly not our focus right now, but it could be lasting. I just share that thought with you, but it is really very much a personalized learning and student agency, which I know teachers have really been talking about for a long time. And I think there's been a lot of inertia in education that's made it harder for them to move in that direction. And we all know that change comes from a sense of urgency, and maybe this sense of urgency is going to liberate our hardworking teachers to really make some of the changes that they've wanted to. So with that, I'm going to turn to Carmen and just ask if the folks could introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to move on.
Hi, my name is Carmen Geisels, and I am the Deputy Superintendent, Chief Human Relations Officer for the district. So I deal with all people, little and big, young and seasoned. And I've been listening, I've been taking furious notes, and it's been a privilege to sit and listen to your thought processes, because it's like watching a documentary. You get a lot of knowledge and experiences and perspective. And I've been thinking about all of this, and I think for me, it's 4 big pieces for all of this change. I know we need to plan for our future years, but I'm thinking future generations, with administrators and teachers, how they're going to deal with all of this. And I think I have learned that we have to educate our children and our administrators and our teachers to be in an interconnected world. It is no longer us in isolation, Mountain View Wisman. It is all of us together. And I think with Jose's comments about partnering, we have so many requests for things that it's really, as Laura says, coordinating all of those efforts together. And I think too, a big piece that I deal with is refining the role of our educators. I mean, they will always be our first teachers, but they're going to end up transitioning perhaps to facilitators of knowledge. Because right now, children can click, click, click and find out anything they need, but it's our job to navigate through that. And I think that's a big piece. And I think also teaching our children, as Laura mentioned, the skills for the future. It's about resiliency and adaptability. I've heard from so many teachers and parents and administrators in our district who have small children, and I tell them, it's about, you're their first teacher, and it's about how they see you cope with this, how they see you react to this. And the education piece we will work on, but that's a huge piece. And I think it'll give them lasting effects into their workforce years. And I think too, the big piece is technology. Devin said it so clearly, and so did Jose, everyone did. It is really showing our digital divide and our gaps. And I think we are going to have to experience new possibilities to do things differently with greater flexibility and seeing how our results can be different. So everything is going to change, I think. Just the teaching and learning is the heart of our district. And then the blood and the veins and everything else, the organs, we have to follow along. So I know it sounds kind of, big and grandiose, but that's why I believe in what I'm doing. And I'm so excited to look at this as an opportunity. Yes, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to evolve together. So.
Nancy?
Good morning, everybody. My intro is a little bit shorter than Carmen's. I'm the newly appointed executive assistant to the superintendent.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's nice to meet you. Okay, Rebecca.
Hi. Nancy is newly appointed to the superintendent, but I'm still very disappointed that she's leaving our office because she used to work in the business service department. I'm Dr. Rebecca Westover, and I've taught elementary, middle, and high school, so all the grade spans, although the lowest I went was 3rd grade. I think it takes a very special teacher to teach kindergarten. The times that I subbed in a kindergarten class as a principal, I was exhausted at the end of the day. I mean, they get out at 2 o'clock, and that hour I felt like I just needed to sit. So I have a 2-year-old at home, And I have similar levels of exhaustion sometime at the end of the day as when I was subbing in kindergarten, but love him dearly. I think one thing that this COVID-19 has really brought to the forefront for me is that schools serve so many important roles for kids, that when we had to make this very fast transition to digital learning, all these other pieces that most community members and parents don't think about, such as mental health and socialization for kids, and just all of the pieces that the school district also provides within the normal school day, physical therapy for kids that are in special education. These pieces all became very visible. And I think even as we make this transition, we're going to have to find ways to fill those gaps for the students and make sure that it's still meaningful to them. I think everyone, touched on the digital divide problem, and, kids are making it work. I think I've seen posts where kids are looking at a small iPhone to get their work done. They're in high school, but they have the drive to get it done. So I think there's many things that we need to address, but agreeing with Carmen that I don't think things are ever going to go back to the way they were before, because now we've experienced this new platform for learning. So if a child is sick, there's no reason for them to miss class anymore because we can provide the material online.
And likewise, a teacher can't be sick because we're just going to expect them to keep
yeah, exactly.
So no, I did say that with all humor. I didn't intend it as a directive. So
it's very true, though.
So there's a lot of great discussion, and it's wonderful for your superintendent and your staff to hear this from the board. And now I think what we're going to do is we're going to turn to the superintendent to guide you through what he sees as the timeline for examining the new normal 2021, going back to school, and to get from you a sense of priorities. Some of the things Peter and I heard, the digital divide, what does that mean for equipment? What does that mean for partnership? Professional development, investing in your talent. One of your goals is human capital, investing in talent. What does that look like today as we're making this shift, as Ellen said, moving toward more using the online platform? I'm going to keep an ear out for words, and at the end of this, help make sure that you all agree on words, because words are powerful. So we watched, and let me be specific, because Peter said at the outset, and he's absolutely right, what we want to do is build confidence in leadership, and there's confidence in leadership when leadership is consistent. So when we talk about online learning or distance learning or a digital divide, we all need to mean the same thing. I'll be very brief, but I'll tell you, when I joined the board, and one part of our mission was to help students achieve their potential. A new board member sitting in a retreat like this, though we were sitting together, and this is pre-carb and gluten, so we were eating donuts, but we were, so times were so different then. But she had said her interpretation of that language was that we got every child into the best possible college. And that opened up quite a conversation on our board, because I said, no, I don't agree with that. I think children, there's a wide span of abilities and talents and potential. And I said, I think you may have just told a parent of a child with severe special needs who might not be headed toward college, but looking more at an occupation or some other form of education. I think you're marginalizing unintentionally, and that being on the board doesn't mean advocating for your kitchen table. It means advocating for every kitchen table, every family. So from that, my point is, we had a really long conversation about a healthy conversation about words and what they mean. And so I'm going to listen as you talk with your superintendent and make sure we're all agreeing on what distance learning means, what online learning means, and so forth, because you'll move forward from here and you will help your community understand where you're going. So that'll be my role right now. And I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent and ask him to kind of guide you through priorities and or next steps, and get from the board your sense of priorities for his work. But I'll be listening for words.
All right. Thanks, Carolyn.
Yeah.
All right, so I am going to share my screen and we're gonna start here. So hopefully, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. So I think it's important for us as we talk about where we're headed next, to really also address where we've been. And then what I'm hoping for this, just as Carolyn and Peter have both pointed out, is to get some guidance about what we should be thinking about and what we should do next. So when we start off, as always, we look at our strategic plan. And really, I would say, I think where we are has the ability to threaten multiple goals. And probably I should have put all 5 up there, right? There are clear issues around student achievement that we can tackle. There are clear issues about the achievement gap. There are clear issues about how do we include individuals, especially virtually. So we're starting to do more Zoom meetings, but how do we make sure that we're getting as many voices heard? How do we train our teachers? How do we keep them engaged? How are we respectful about their needs because they're sitting at home also, right? And I think those are all important conversations. But also the conversation, which I didn't put on here, which is goal 5, which is how do we make sure that as we go down this road, that we are really in a good place fiscally, that we can manage the day-to-day operations, and at the same time not over leverage ourselves to try and do everything that people want. And so let's talk about first flexible learning options and distance learning plan. So we started with flexible learning options, and I like to call this version 1, right? So we created work packets for temporary shutdown, and we required teachers to send out activities, they send notes and hold office hours with families. I mean, there were other things that occurred, but for the most part, that was it. And that was based off of, it was shutting down on March 13th. We should be back in school in a couple weeks. No longer than 3, and 4 of you include spring break. And what we realized quickly was on March 13th, after we passed out about 300 something Chromebooks with our first distribution, there were still 615 families that still needed a device. So in total, if you think about this, the total number of individuals, and these are families, not students, but we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%, over 1,000 kids were still in need of a device on March 13th. And then of those, there were 247 families that were without internet. So that is a pretty large number that we had to tackle. So I can tell you as of next week, we've tackled that by doing a couple of things. The first one is that we worked with MVWSD and Google to get a $100,000 grant. We purchased 200 Chromebooks, where we have 250 hotspots that are coming in. And then we're also distributing extra Chromebooks. Now, this distribution is on top of what we already do for 1,500 of our students, which is we provide them with a device if they're in middle school that they get to keep when they walk out the door, right? So we're going full tilt on this particular item here. And so this week, we just concluded our second Chromebook distribution for all of the identified families. And I have to commend our SCEPs and our principals for going out and finding out who was without. And then even board members informed us of individual parents or community members who had children but didn't have a device and they wanted to send us. In addition to that, we also turned 6 parking lots into our Wi-Fi hotspots for students. So Mistral, Montaloma, Landos, Graham, Crittenden, and the district office now have our parking lots are now enabled for for students to drive on. And we know that it's not, yes, we want to maintain social distancing, but we also felt like if a family could get in their car and drive to one of these locations, or if they could practice social distancing and show up, they could at least get on the internet. And one of the feedbacks that we got was from a parent who brought up a very good point, He said, last week I downloaded 2 gigs worth of work for my child. Now imagine if someone has the Internet Essentials program, they're going to burn through their data allotment within the first week. So we felt like that's one thing that we could also do. We also are exploring the possibility of turning buses into hotspots and driving those buses into high needs areas also. The problem with the bus is that there's a limited capacity, but it's our approach to solving the digital divide, and we've done this in less than a month's time. In addition to that, version 2 includes a more robust distance learning plan. So the first one is that we now have guidelines for work. If you're in TK through 2nd grade, we're expecting you to do about 1 to 3 hours of work per day, no more than 3. And if you're in 3rd through 8th, we're expecting no more than 4 hours per day. Now, this is outside of the check-ins, the lessons, the office hours, the small group instruction, as well as the music and art classes that are and PE classes that are occurring. This is pure work for kids. But we wanted to build upon what we were doing for our flexible learning plan, and we looked at best practices from across our sites and sort of designed some more options, right? And so our new distance learning plan adds keeps check-ins, but it also now provides new lessons 2 times a week for every single class or course, which means the students are getting about 8 different lessons that are being taught by their teachers. Which is, they're phased in. Some are Mondays and Wednesdays, others are Tuesdays and Thursdays, depending on the grade level. Every student, Monday through Friday, is receiving work that they have to do. We now have an option for art, STEAM, and PE lessons that will be taught live. Every teacher is migrating over to Google Classroom, which brings a uniform content delivery platform. It also enables us to address the needs of those individuals who just have phones. Having the Google Classroom app means that everyone has access to it. And one of the considerations that we had to take into account was that, are we in a position where we can print off these work packets every single week? And if we're not in position, then how do we address the fact that we need to get this information out to individuals? And we realize that almost everyone has a smartphone now. And so by having the app and encouraging people to download it, we can at least get around the printing concerns, because what we do know is that if one of our printers broke down, the Xerox company is not considered an essential employee. And so we're not going to get someone out to help service those machines. Finally, each teacher is going to host virtual check-ins twice a week for social interaction of our students. Assignments could be delivered. We also pass out workbooks, all consumables. So we now have 3 ways that assignments can be delivered, either through the workbooks, Google Classroom, or through digital lessons. Librarians are now hosting book clubs and providing book readings for younger students. IEP services within county health guidelines. Obviously, there are some services that we can provide through telehealth. There are other services that we can't. We'll continue, and teachers and instructional assistants will provide additional supports. SCEFs, secretaries, clerks, at-risk coordinators are all going to check in families who are not engaging. In terms of student placement, MVLA, MVWSD, and Los Altos School District have all agreed on a uniform approach for math placement for all of our 8th graders, considering that Los Altos and Mountain View, Wisman, both use similar assessments. So we're currently working on what those guidelines would look like. And then the last thing is, based off of board feedback, students are expected to do work. Feedback will be provided. However, we're not going to penalize students across the board. But we do want to encourage students to actually do the work. And for the most part, the feedback that we received through Thought Exchange is saying that students are at least doing the work. But there are some considerations here. So I think the first one, as we move into what the timeline is going to look like, we don't know what we don't know. We don't understand what the long-term impact of COVID-19 is going to be. Obviously, Governor Newsom has hinted at the possibility that we may or may not open regularly in the fall. And so we need to continue to look for guidance from the feds, the state, and the county about what our expectations are. But we also, during this time, can monitor the needs of others. So it's very interesting that Denmark reopened their schools this week. And they have a lot of social distancing decisions that they're making. So following what's taking place in Denmark and in other countries to see, what practices were put in place. Preschools has some precautionary measures in terms of keeping the numbers small. I believe it's seven or 8 kids that can be together. In addition to that, they have to stay within that group. But looking at sort of what those precautionary measures are and then predicting, are they going to be, or will they be applied to schools is going to be interesting. But we also should explore the worst case scenario, which is that we're not going to have school. And our only solution is going to be to offer virtual learning for all in the fall. And what is the impact of that? And then our team cabinet is currently working through some different ideas or scenarios that are going to take place. So that way we have sort of a buffet that we can choose from as we start to get governor's guidance on what comes next. But I think what is clear here, and we've all hinted at this pandemic has exposed, it has exasperated the inequities that exist within our community, our district, and within the nation. It has exposed, sort of the underbelly of the good nature that we profess that we have. And it's going to require for all of us to work together as a community in order to get past this and to relinquish this need for opportunity hoarding, and really start to say what's good for me is also, it needs to be what's good for our overall community, which means that we got to redefine our system. We need to become a district that can address the diverse needs of all of our students. And we don't necessarily know what that looks like, but we have to figure out a way. And I say this especially for those who are the most vulnerable, those who are least equipped to do distance learning, those who need supplemental instruction, learning gap plans, summer schools, or students with disabilities. We need to figure out, how do we make sure that the education we provide for them is as equal to the students that have. And those students that have are span across the globe. In addition to that, I would say we also need to understand how we are going to promote and reassure equity, in a sense that it promotes the social fiber, or it makes students who normally are at risk or who normally feel like they're not capable. It makes our dyslexic students feel as if they still can perform, even though they're now working in a different format and the supports that they have are a lot less than what they had when they were in school. And that's going to be an important issue for us moving forward. And so there are some questions that I have for the board. I'm going to share these twice so that it'll show back up before I kick back over to Terilyn and Peter. But the first question is, for the board to identify what community needs actually do exist, and to help us to understand, are you okay with us reallocating funds, possibly suspension of big expenditures to adequately address the new normal? If we are moving to a world where it's possible that we're going to have to do virtual learning, do we create a one-to-one environment? Not a one-to-one environment like our middle school where kids are taking the devices back and forth, but maybe a part of what we do now is we issue a Chromebook along with a textbook that stays at home, and in the event that a parent needs it, right? All those are types of things that we should be considering. And so if you say yes, that we should reallocate funds to address this, do you have any ideas about where we should head as a district? Should we explore learning platforms that may be a little bit more robust? Should we invest in training that needs to take place? Right, so what type of ideas, just based off of the things that you're hearing, should we be considering? I also think considering the implications around equity that are now front and center, how do you envision the district tackling this problem? Before this retreat, there was a lot of conversation about culturally responsive training, culturally responsive curriculum, and now we are moving into a world where, you know, teachers are pulling this information from all over. And do we still continue our equity training? Do we still continue things like being culturally responsive? And is that important to the board? And then also sort of what ideas you have around public engagement. Obviously, there are a lot of individuals who have a lot of opinions about where we should be. And there's a strong debate about sort of what the balance is. When the results from our thought exchange, which we're still going through, highlight the clear sort of duality that exists within our community of individuals who want online learning and then their neighbor who doesn't want their kid to be put under that type of stress and is okay with not having their kid be have a robust amount of screen time. And so how does the board envision us gathering public engagement outside of our traditional formats? Because, you know, one of the things I would talk about, and what this will come up in the communications presentation, normally when we're embarking on a process that requires a lot of change, there are thought exchanges that are sent out, there are public meetings that we have, there are sort of informal meetings like superintendent coffees, cafecitos, Saturdays with the superintendents, principal coffees that allow us to collect feedback. And all of those right now are non-existent. So how do we get public engagement across the board? And so what are the next steps? And I think our team, which is, you know, a little stressed out about this, but I told them we can do it. We have to come up with a new plan, right? So this distance learning plan will only take us to the end of the year. We will possibly need a more robust plan before the year ends out, right? Because if we're going to go to a virtual learning plan, then we need to really dive into the devices. And it's going to take more than the 200 we just purchased and handed out. It's going to require us to, you know, rethink about it. You know, how do we hand out devices to the other 3,500 students that need them, or not really need them, but that are a part of our student population. So right now, April and May, we are reviewing our thought exchange, which is really our assessment of need from stakeholders. We'll continue to connect with the California Department of Education and Accounting to understand sort of the context. The information is coming out slowly. Obviously, the governor yesterday highlighted the 6 conditions that are going to require, that will allow us to understand when the state of California reopens, but we need to understand the context and sort of get an idea of where they are leaning towards. We really need to identify the best practices for reopening. Obviously, we can't look within the state. We need to look across multiple states and across the world to see how different communities are handling schools. And then, you know, again, going with the worst case scenario, we need to explore the feasibility of virtual learning. So all this has to happen within the next month and a half. In addition to that, we need to come up with several plans. We need to have a learning gap plan. And the learning gap plan, which I've talked about for quite some time, is, and luckily our two partner districts said the exact same thing. We need to work with teachers to understand what is really essential between what has been missed and what we have to teach. The best case scenario is that on August 17th, we start school. And, you know, teachers are saying, well, how do I make up for the last 5 months where kids weren't in school? And what does that look like? And so that learning gap plan addresses that. We need to sort of, you know, I think if there's one thing that's been highlighted here is that virtual learning, there is some possibilities, but should we explore virtual summer schools and what that looks like? So coming up with a virtual summer school learning plan is important. again, worst case scenarios, we may not be able to open it if gatherings, large gatherings across the state have been banned until 2021. It's possible we may need a virtual learning plan, because what is being predicted is that we may see a drop and then we may see an increase once the weather turns and flu season picks back up. We already created a revised April reopening plan, but I think it's time to review and revise that. And so we need to look at, is this plan really adequate for what we need to do if we were going to start? And then we need to come up with a phased opening plan. What is that going to look like? And so all of these become part of the menu that we can sort of choose. But this is, obviously you can see this is a lot to tackle between now and early June. But we also, the county has stated that the LCAP is being postponed until December 15th, but we're still going to have to approve our budget. And if we're going to approve our budget, then the feedback that you give us today will help us to align the budget to meet the new needs that are sort of there. Obviously, we want to make sure that we gather feedback from trustees and stakeholders. We need to engage the community and our corporate partners. What we are starting to see from our corporate partners is that there's a bigger shift of focus to those who, to the corporate partners supporting food shelters, our food distribution, homeless shelters, rent stability, right? And so where we used to be one of the top priorities, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're a little bit further down in that regard, but we're going to need to engage them to at least help, because we are providing meals to individuals. We are providing some type of stability and continuity for our students. And so just engaging them in that sort of process. And then obviously we need to finalize the budget and communicate a plan of action. And so I put these questions back up. I know you have them in your presentation, but again, it's really about defining what community needs exist. Should we really dive into our budget and look to reallocate funds and maybe possibly suspend big expenditures to address the new normal, and what ideas you have around that? Is equity still a priority? And should we address that? And how do you envision us sort of tackling that? And then again, the ideas that you have around public engagement and how that process needs to go. And again, I want to point out, we are doing PTA meetings, DLAC, DAC over Zoom. But that doesn't mean, whenever we wanted to go talk about something, we could leverage the principal and the superintendent call fees to bring more people in than who are a part of these representative groups. And so that's another consideration to have. And that is the end of the presentation, Carolyn.
Thank you very much. So we would like to hear now from the board. I'll try to, I want to make sure that we hear from everybody and that you discuss and deliberate together so that you can set direction for your superintendent. I'm going to begin with Tamara as president, but what I think is important for us to remember is that this isn't like sort of roll call, move down, like in a board meeting where you speak and it's over. You really are going to go back and forth with one another to process and land on what are the priorities you want to set forth for your superintendent. Before I turn it over to you, Tamara, and just hear your thoughts from all of this information, beginning with where you thought you'd see lasting change. Some of the themes were the digital divide might be addressed, a more robust or thoughtful approach to online instructional strategies and learning strategies, and bringing your teachers along and so forth. I would just encourage you to think about whether or not we faced a pandemic, or that was ill phrased, whether or not the fall is going to be changed for us. We know that it will be, but whether or not it was going to be, what from this experience would you tackle based on what's in front of you? Because that's what's really fundamental. Okay, so let me try to say that a little bit more articulately, said the Director of Communications. We know we're going into a fall that will be different. But what if it wasn't going to be different? Even with what we've just experienced, are there things we would be looking at because we know we'd be better for it? That might be helpful in terms of your analysis, because there's so much for you to process, so much coming in at you. So to illustrate that point, would we really be looking at how we use virtual learning just to improve what we offer and to help bridge a divide? Would you look at the digital divide anyway, even if fall wasn't going to be different? Has it just revealed to you that that's not acceptable? So I'm going to stop talking and turn it to Tamara and encourage everyone, please share your thoughts with each other. You don't have one shot at speaking. We're going to go back and forth and back and forth. So you don't have to feel like you've got to get it all out at once. Let's start with you, Tamara, and see, what would you want the superintendent to focus on moving into a pretty busy summer?
Yeah, I tried to take notes as Dr. Rudolph was speaking, and I saw those 4 main themes, which was community needs, our thoughts about reallocation of funds, the equity piece, and public engagement. And I have comments on all of them, but to start off, creating an umbrella here, there are many, many unknowns. In my research, I do scenario planning. So I know it's best to look at divergent futures, and you always want to plan for the worst case, which in this case may be not opening at all. And then I think that's the plan we need to really be targeting and planning for. And because if we're not ready for that, we've failed. So I'll start there. We may not reopen, and that's where I would like a lot of our decision making, and in my mind, that's where we should be thinking about and framing our thoughts. And we may open. I don't want to be a doomsday prophet here, but I think it's best to plan for the worst and create maybe versions of the worst plan in tiered forms, where a moderate plan where we may have sure, half of them are in school half the day, half of them are in the other, or however that might look. I don't want to prescribe it, but there are many unknowns, and I think the plans need to be based on several trajectories and or what we can term scenarios, best, middle, worst, however you want to frame it. Our community needs in any of those are access. Every kid, I think, needs to have access. Every kid needs to have a Chromebook, and this will segue into the reallocation of funds, because currently all of our kids in middle school have these Chromebooks, but we have a substantially larger population in K through 5 that may or may not. And what that means in terms of funds reallocation is you have to get IT support for devices that are not within your physical access or control, and that's a real challenge for IT. So that would mean a reallocation of funds for additional IT support. But the community needs, back to that first theme, is access. So it's actually devices and it's internet capability in whatever form we end up in the fall and are moving forward, or January. That is a critical community need. So physical access and digital internet access. And I think number 2 is teacher training. There we have such a range of capacities and capabilities and comfort levels with our teachers, which is perfectly normal. It's that way in every profession, and it's varying across platforms. So I think teacher training is critical. I'll move on to reallocation of funds. I think I hadn't quite thought through a virtual summer school, but I really like that idea, and I think it segues nicely. If we did succeed at everyone has access, everyone has internet, I would be very comfortable seeing a reallocation of funds towards that. I'm not sure if I would love to see an accelerated timeline, if there would be any way we could do some kind of offering in this summer. I think the parents would, if given the opportunity and asked, they would say the same. So that I'll move on to public engagement. I have a couple
Tamara,
here. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we should talk about these thematically. I just asked the question.
That might be really good. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. They are kind of, some of them are connected and some of them are disparate. I'm open to ideas and to approaching this however seems most logical.
Maybe we could begin with a question. Does have the board respond to the notion? And I thought it was just so well put, Tamara. Let's look at worst case scenario and hope we can dial it back if we have the opportunity. But do we want to plan with that in mind, a virtual fall? And I'd like to hear the board talk about that, because if that's sort of a northern light for your superintendent. Yes, Laura?
Well, for me, I mean, I think we need to have that. We need to have a plan for that. But what almost seems more complicated is some kind of a staged or phased or partial. I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't know how linked they are. So I think we need to, it may be a plan A and a plan B. And maybe they are more linked than I appreciate. But I don't feel like we can just do the schools do not open at all. I feel like we have to also do what would some kind of a phasing look like as well.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Tandem, maybe.
Comment, like you should have the worst and middle and best. And I think you can take pieces of each. So access and internet will need to take place no matter what the outcome. But no, absolutely. It's not just but if you don't plan for the worst, then things will backfire.
Well, it's almost like two different worsts. I guess that's how I'm looking at it. I don't know what others feel.
I like to be able to pitch in with a quick question, because that would help me. I mean, there's obvious community needs, but number two, I think, takes precedence for me. Should we reallocate funds to spend big expenditures? Well, what are we talking about? What programs are we looking at, and how much money is that associated with? And then based on that, it would help me to then better understand how we can use that amount, whatever it may be, to then address some of these questions. So I'd like to ask Dr. Rudolph, when you wrote number two, or when that was brought up, which big expenditures were you thinking about?
I think one of the natural ones is textbook adoption. We were about to adopt 2 textbooks. And is that really the right thing to do? And should we look for different types of options? I also think, and Dr. Westover, you can feel free to chime in too, because I know you're looking at the budget assumptions. But I think going through and looking at, you start cutting yourself down to a bare minimum and sort of working with things that are sort of needed. So for instance, we know telehealth is necessary for students with IEPs. Right, which means that there has to be some type of investment within those regards. And so how, if we're going towards a virtual world, then we have to cut back in some other place in order to make this happen. So those are the types of things I'm thinking about. But, I think those start to come out as we start to understand where the board wants to drive us. If, for instance, and if we believe that every kid needs to have a Chromebook and every kid needs to have internet access, and that's just a public right, then that becomes an expenditure that we have to budget for. And if that's an expenditure we have to budget for, then the natural question is, what do we cut back at? And we would bring back some ideas about, well, here's how we can make this a possibility. And these are value propositions, right? I'm not arguing that we don't need new textbooks, because we do. I think that since the last time we've got social studies textbooks, I think there have been multiple presidents that have came through. And in fact, I don't even think Obama's been mentioned in either one of those, right? So that just highlights the need for new, I think it's 3 presidential terms have lapsed. So that highlights the need to have some type of textbook. But is that the most important thing right now? Is having an up-to-date social studies textbook the most important thing, considering that we have kids without internet? Do we, as we purchase Chromebooks, do we start to pay the extra? There are some companies out there that have Chromebook, that have the internet built into the Chromebook, where yes, you have to pay the fee after the first year, but you spend $120 something more to have a connected Chromebook than buying the same Chromebook that isn't connected, right? And those, yes, it will increase your expenditures by 50%, but at least you know, and you have that there. And so I think that's sort of the direction that we're looking for, that will help us to make some really tough decisions.
Okay, so I hear textbooks, but how about RTI? Because that's 1 point something million. How does that factor into now virtual learning? Will that still be an asset for us in this new environment if it is shut down for the full year? Or is that something that we can also look at? And then outside of that, what other big ticket expenditure is there that you think we may look into as well?
You know, I don't think we want to get in a position, because to eliminate RTI means we're going to have to eliminate teachers, right? And so I don't want to get into that position where we're cutting jobs, not when we don't have to. But I do think that we could re-examine how RTI is done and what people are doing, and create a new scenario for RTI that's a little bit different than what it is when you're there. And again, I don't know what the other big expenditures are, and partly because we didn't spend time going through each large ticket item. But the similar way we always do this, right? We take the budget, we say, here are the needs that we have to address. And then we start turning around and saying, well, you know, the budget's $82 million. We now have $85 million in expenditures. Yes, we can spend out our reserves, but what we know is we're not going to feel the impact of COVID-19 this year. We're going to feel the impact of COVID-19 next year. And so it doesn't make sense to spend our reserves. So we should probably readjust in some other type of fashion. And I think it's those types of things that are going to come into play. You know, we're negotiating raises for this year, and I know that's on the board for approval, but next year it's going to be the tight year, right? And so maybe we put a freeze on those, right? It's those types of things that we would have to take into consideration. You know, and Rebecca and her team would look at, you know, how conservative can we get, and how do we continue to reduce our costs? We've turned off all the electricity and the HVACs at our buildings. We could install solar, so we're generating more money to reduce the cost even further. And you know, but it's those types of things that we just have to explore. But it's, again, I want to say it's based off of where the board would like us to go.
Right. I think for today, especially the way this was agendized, it's important for you to give the superintendent a clear sense of direction, and then he would come back to you with suggestions on how we balance the budget, prioritize. But I think, so we heard Tamara say access for all. This has revealed an issue of access, both with equipment and with internet capacity. And we also heard Ellen open with that in her own presentation of what she thinks is a lasting change. So maybe we'll come back to you, Laura, and ask you, just starting with that topic of access, is that something that you agree is a community priority?
I agree. And Tamara's, the second one that she mentioned, I think, was training. And maybe that goes in tandem, but I definitely think training and providing support for the teachers in terms of how to best deliver remotely, and or what we talked about distance learning at our last board meeting, that it doesn't necessarily mean just online, but teaching from afar. I think our teachers are, you know, they're the one-on-one, and they're such a valuable resource, and we need to support them. So I think those two things are huge. As far as other community needs, I'm worried about sort of mental health and anxiety and the long-term implications of that on our population. And I don't remember who brought up that our schools do so many things. It's not just, I think this was Rebecca, it's not just education, you know, the read and write and arithmetic. And that's a piece. I don't know whether that's going to be a problem or not, but that's something I'm concerned about.
Evan, you've had your hand up for a while.
Devin, please, I
I'm
saw
sorry, you know what, I'm sorry, Devin, you're not on my screen, I apologize.
there is the raise hand function, and if you open the participants box.
I tried that earlier.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, I didn't have it open either.
It's
Devin.
okay. So
Just real quick, I would just say, sorry, Devin, if you all could switch your speaker view, because there's only 11 participants in here, and it looks a little bit more like the Brady Bunch. So then everybody can see everybody.
So to
and it's
click that,
right
you go to the
right
upper
hand.
right multiple box to click that. If no people aren't aware of how to do that.
Yep.
So now Devin is down near Cindy Brady's spot.
well, it's different. It's different on everyone's screen, but so I think going one-to-one is something that we're going to need to do for access. I know we don't want to spend down our reserves, but this is what reserves are for to a certain extent. It may be shifting the reserve level by 1% from 17 to 16% to get us through this moment. This is not something that we're going to have happen every single year, knock on wood. But it is a huge change and a huge transition. I would like us to find whatever we can within the budget to do it within our existing framework, but I am not opposed to lowering the reserve level to be able to get us through this crisis. We have one of the healthiest reserve levels of any district in the county. And I think, we have lots of need that we need to address right now. Along with that one-to-one access, I agree on the training for teachers. It's going to be interesting to see what providers come up with training for teachers in this situation. I think it's a whole new field, and there's going to be more and more options that pop up, but evaluating which trainings are actually good is going to be different. I'd like us to keep our curriculum adoptions if we can, because that curriculum is really outdated. And I think it would be a disservice to our students not to update it when we've already done so much work towards that. And I think a trauma-informed approach is going to be really important in how we go forward. How you do trauma-informed instruction and culturally responsive instruction within a virtual setting, I don't know. But, we have students who whose families don't have enough food right now, who may be in fear of losing their homes. We have a moratorium on rent payments, but the not having to pay your rent now, it's going to accumulate and you're going to have to pay it later when the moratorium is lifted, or moratorium on evictions, excuse me. Like that rent is going to build up. So something we saw an immediate need in March when we moved to optional learning and now to distance learning. But in the coming weeks, I think we are going to see the needs of our students continue to increase. Families that didn't need support with a Chromebook before or Wi-Fi before are going to need support now. Families that didn't need food before are going to need food now. And so, yeah, I think it comes down for me to if there is a time to use a small percentage, but a percentage of that reserve level, I think this is a global pandemic seems like a reasonable time.
Thank you.
I would, if I could speak to that, the community needs are pretty obvious: access, and then computers or Chromebooks for all, the hotspots, teacher training. That seems to cover the basics. The other thing would be that we know that for food, at least for the students that need it, we have that ongoing for this year in terms of the academic year, including the summer. But do we have the resources to add on for these expenditures by looking at the current budget? I don't know that we can, because I don't want to lose the textbooks, because we've pushed that a little bit too far, I think. I think if we do tap into the reserves like we should, it would be for something like this, because it makes sense.
And Ellen, I don't know if you
Yes. Yeah, so thank you. And I don't know if on your screen you see that I'm in like sideways, but I'm working on two laptops right now, and my first one, all I can do is hear now, can't see anything. So I turned myself on this one, but it's having me look at the other one. So that's the explanation. I agree with just about everything everybody else said. I agree with virtual summer school. I agree with going down to 16% reserve. If we were to do that, I would want it to be for extraordinary expenses like this. I wouldn't want it to be a norm. And in particular, I think that next year, not this year, but next year, it would be appropriate to freeze salaries so that we don't get used to a 16% reserve. I agree with Devin about the trauma-informed instruction. So Dr. Rudolph, you were talking about community engagement, and I would extend that to teacher engagement and principal engagement, that it's more important than ever that people either take sensitivity training or trauma-informed training, or at least, you know, send those words out there frequently so that people, people who are working with the students have those in the forefront of their minds, because as everybody said, this is a very traumatic time, and it's normal for people to speak out with stress, and that's not what is helpful right now. Let's see, I wrote a whole bunch of notes, but I think, I agree with everybody about Chromebooks for all and internet for all. So, you know, your idea, Allende, of buying Chromebooks that have internet access, maybe that would be something that we'd use the 16% reserve for. I don't know what else to add.
So at this point, I'm not sure, I think we've heard from Jose, but I want to make sure we hear from Jose. It's sounding like there's a unanimous consensus on the themes of access, both the tools and the internet. I don't think this board is necessarily going to give you direction whether the device should have internet capacity built in or not. They've looked to you for assessment on that, sir. And I'm hearing consensus around, or at least a majority on mental health and trauma-informed instruction, and an appropriate discussion about accessing your resources for extraordinary expenses. Although Devin did say go ahead and buy textbooks if we needed them, but Ellen opened it up more as wanting to say that we've accessed our reserve for extraordinary expenses. I think it's important that you talk about that, so the board has given the superintendent direction. And if asked by anyone, are you dipping into the reserves, which they'd possibly be very comfortable with, you'd all be saying the same thing, which is, yes, this is an extraordinary time. As Devin said, a pandemic is an extraordinary time, and we're looking at it for extraordinary expenses, i.e. one-to-one devices and affiliated training. Is that the direction of the board? Is that what you heard, President Wilson?
You're on mute, Tamara.
You owe me a Coke, Laura.
Yeah, Lucas is in the background giggling, so I had to mute it. Yes, I think I've heard a consensus on access and training, and at least 2 people discussing a focus on mental health.
Right.
I'm on board with that as well. And virtual summer school, I'm on board with utilizing 1% or whatever it takes to make the agreed upon actions happen. It could be 1.2%.
Okay, I see nods for that. I just want to make sure that this is okay. Look at there.
You're muted, Dr. Rudolph. Speaking to someone else.
Yeah, Dr. Rudolph, do you hear direction in this? Do you hear clear direction?
But I would just I think it's one thing to say 1%, and I think it's another thing to say you expect us to use our reserves to address these particular issues. If you say 1%, 1% could be 1.7 million. It could be 400,000, right? And so I guess we would bring back as part of our approach what we expect and why we're doing it, and sort of put it out there. But if you specifically say 1%, I will take that as gospel, and we will do 1%, and we will not go over that amount. And that's fine if that's what you want. I just want to make sure that you're intentionally saying that's what you want. And Dr. Westover, if you want to tell them what our reserve level is so they know what 1% is, and then you can make your decision. It's up to you. My gut would tell me what you're really trying to say is utilize the reserves to make these decisions and then come back to us. But several of you have now honed in on 1%. And so while my gut is telling me that's the interpretation, technically what you're really telling me is 1%.
Got it.
I'm going to take back 1% and say, can you let us know what it would take? And we can explore using our reserves.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
And I would go even further to say I'm comfortable using some of the reserves, but
exactly
would love to hear back as you plan.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yep.
All right.
I got a thumbs up from Ellen if you didn't see it.
And Laura did have her hand up before I said something, so I think she had a point.
I took it down. I'm okay. I just was hoping we were going to get to some of the other points, and I feel a little bit badly if I said, let's take these thematically because they were interrelated, but I know Tamara had more to say, and I think we haven't really fully explored equity and public engagement yet.
Right. I think what you have left is equity and public engagement, though you have really looked at community needs in a very healthy discussion and connected budget to it. I do want to ask you a question before you move off of mental health, trauma-informed instruction. And this is a question that comes from working with districts up and down the state. And you'll forgive me, Superintendent, that we didn't discuss this in advance, but I'm wondering, is it important to you also to look at the emotional supports that your employees need?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to give clarification that because we're not just talking about students, but we're talking about students and staff. And on the topic of, so I see nods, yes. On the topic of professional development, you are saying teachers. I do want further clarification for your superintendent. Are you talking about teachers and administrators? Because your site administrators are going to drive this change.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Dr. Rudolph. With the emotional support needs that our faculty and staff will require, please don't anyone misunderstand the question, but isn't that part of an option that we have within the medical plans that we offer? That they have that, or is it different? It varies by healthcare package that they select.
So we do not have, and of course now I am forgetting what the name of the program is, and I've talked about this a couple of times with Carmen. It's the resource that you have that you can refer people to, EAB, Employee Assistance, or EAP, Employee Assistance Program. We don't have.
If I can interject, Dr. Rudolph, recently, just Thursday, we received an email, all the HR folks in the county that work with the schools insurance group, they are developing a long-term plan for employee assistance program for 2021 school year. So if we're part of the SIG, we could tap into that. So it would include a 24/7 hotline for a counselor for our employees. So it'd be a tiered support. They're working out all the kinks. So that would be the first step. And the second step is another program where they would align their counseling services with insurance. So they're in the works right now, and they would like to hopefully launch that for the 2021 school year. So that's a great way that we can partner with our schools insurance group. So it's coming, which is nice, because as Dr. Rudolph said, the only option we had was to tell them to see their medical provider. So we're working on that.
Laura?
I would just add one other thing, that support for staff may not just take the form of kind of one-on-one counseling. It might be some kinds of trainings for how teams pull together in these circumstances, or it kind of group things for tools that they can use, or mindfulness techniques. I don't know. I don't know that it would be just kind of one-on-one counseling, but I'm supportive of whatever is appropriate.
Right. And it can just come from, and this is going to move into sort of public engagement, applying the word public to your employees as well as your external stakeholders. It can just be explicitly opening up that conversation with your union leadership. Whatever our people need, you need to let us know. In one district here in it's Castro Valley, they're looking at helping teachers understand how to manage classroom discipline online. They just needed a hand. And that one way you could see that as falling into training, but in another, it's kind of emotional demand on them. And plus they're still mandated reporters, and now they've been brought into homes, and there's that's a lot for a teacher. I see Devin, that is a lot for a teacher. And my husband's a teacher. I'll just tell you, can be a gut wrencher. So, so we want to just make sure that we open up the conversation. You need to let us know what you need. And I wanted to make sure that we discuss that with your superintendent, so he hears that this whole thing around social emotional is not just students, but it is all of our people. So I see nods for that. I'm going to move you on to equity as a discussion.
Can I stop and ask if we can take a break?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm not the break queen, so I do need people to remind me we need a bio break. So it's 2
hours.
11:03. It's 11:03, and do you want to just take do you need 5 minutes? 10 minutes? 5? 5. Okay. Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks for the reminder.
Wait, why can't we just get up and go and then come back?
Just don't take your device.
Well, yeah.
At least stop the video.
Carolyn, I'm hoping when we
as equity as a priority and public engagement. And so I'm going to ask the superintendent to restate the question you want to present to the board with regard to equity, so that you can hear from the trustees, if you please.
Yep. So you want us to do equity right now?
Yes, please.
Okay. And some of this you've addressed in terms of access for devices, right? But there are some other implications around equity that are now front and center. And how do we sort of envision the district tackling this problem? I guess, you know, so I've underwent poverty simulation a couple times, right? And how you access stuff is really interesting. On 60 Minutes, which I'm an avid watcher of, they talked about, you know, people filing for unemployment in New York, and them sitting on the phone for 5 hours, and then it becoming a job almost of trying to get through the unemployment just to get the process. Because in New York State, you not only have to fill it out, but then you have to call to verify. And then after you call to verify, then it starts to get processed. And that if you think about poverty simulation, you think about the fact that you're making these phone calls takes you away from doing something else, right? And I will say, you know, as I was listening to the trustees talk, you know, we're in a fortunate place in education and federal employees because right now we're guaranteed funds, right? So our employees, while they may have been worried about whether or not they're going to get paid, they know they are. And so we're in a unique place, but their friends may not be in that same place. And so how are we sensitive to those types of needs? It's going to be a big thing because not everybody's understanding of it. How are we sensitive to when a kid says my family is sick, or somebody is sick and I have these needs and I'm not sure what the impact of that's going to be? Is also how we deal with equity. But the selection of materials is also an important equity point, right? So our teachers are curating information, and they're pulling from our most popular sources, which is fine, and it's a great step. but are we utilizing every single material that's out there to make sure that our kids are being exposed to the wide range of information? So let me give you a good example. You know, oftentimes when we talk about, you know, the great American authors, right? We go to sort of certain people, Twain, right? Right. We start thinking of the people who are easily accessible, maybe even readily available in your house. But if you think about Antonio Vargas, he talked about Toni Morrison as being one of the most influential people in his life, and reading The Bluest Eye and how that had an impact on him. Well, that's easy to do when you're in the classroom and you have a library and you can assign that book because you have those resources there. How does that look now when you don't have it, right? When that isn't there? And maybe that means that we, and I'm just spitballing here, maybe that means that we tackle it with things like Audible or books or some other places where we can download it. I guess what I'm trying to highlight here is that equity is not only about how we interact with individuals and the cultural competencies that are needed in order to make sure that people are treated fairly. It also exists with the decisions that we make, right? The people that we highlight, the things that we reinforce that are just as important. And how do we make sure that we are supporting everyone from an educational standpoint, but also promoting everyone? And that requires a lot of training that we have not traditionally been doing in our district. But this could be an opportune time to really drive those things home. And for us as a district, especially now that we're functioning virtually, that we really dive in and highlight Women's History Month and Black History Month and Latino Heritage Month. And we double down on these types of things to reinforce the idea that you do matter, and that we utilize these opportunities to say, teachers, as you're teaching, this particular concept, we want you to choose content that fits within these months, so that, maybe you're talking about space exploration, and you're now looking at, the first female astronaut and the trials and tribulations that she went through, or when you are, exploring the Cold War, you're looking at things like Hiroshima to understand how nuclear proliferation had an impact on some of the decisions that we make. That is an intentional instructional design that has to be curated and promoted, but it also requires for the board to say, this is really important to us. And this is an opportune time to not only provide access to materials, but access to information, and also promotion of every single person that exists within our community, that they're important. And so I think when I'm talking about equity, those are the types of things that we're sort of looking at that can really help to bolster our position, but really set us aside from where everybody else is, which is just, business as usual.
Okay, so board response to the notion that you're going to use this as an opportunity to really expand on the theme of equity.
Would someone else like to start?
I haven't had my hand up
Laura.
to say yes, 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 yes. I totally embrace that. I think we were overdue with the culturally responsive piece that had been in our last plan, and understandably there were a lot of different things that were in our current expiring strategic plan, and so maybe we bit off a little more than we could chew, but I'd say seize the moment. Now's the time.
Jose nodding yes.
Yes, no, I agree with Laura's perspective, and actually with Dr. Rudolph's. Now's the time to be able to be more inclusive and to promote this diversity of thought, right? If we can do that now and set that as the norm moving forward, that would help out a lot, because then you've got academic freedom involved and curiosity of thought, but then you have a multicultural perspective that affects not just the students, but also faculty and staff. and then our understandings of each other as different types of people that share the same social space and that participate in our public education. So I think that helps out a lot with what we're trying to do.
It is possibly one.
Ellen?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, getting back to textbooks, is this something that the new social studies textbooks are doing? So, you know, we'd have a head start, some sort of template that we can, you know, already lean on.
So as a former social studies teacher, I can tell you the textbook's always a great start. What I'm talking about is a little bit more robust, and it really revolves around the intentionality of instructional design. And so I think there's going to be, there will, just as there is a need to provide professional development for how we utilize these devices, because that is not something that is taught in at least I went through graduate school. I know California is a little bit different, but in my graduate programs, that isn't how teaching was sort of tackled. I sort of learned that through Grant and Wiggins' backwards designing, understanding about design is what it was called. But I think it's really about being intentional to say, this is really important to us. And we need to help people to design those types of things. And, you know, it starts with us, our coaches, our actions, and it continues to build from there. But the textbook is definitely a good start. But I think we can go further than that. And I think this is the opportunity to do it.
So I'd like to follow up on that with, so I agree with everybody that, you know, yes, you know, definitely we want to do this, but who is going to do it? Do we have teachers, or are there teachers around the country who have, you know, lesson plans for these kinds of things? You know, those are my questions.
So I think if this is important, you know, it's similar to the Chromebooks, right? You know, I'm tossing out a couple ideas here, but I think we are already engaging on an alignment survey, and we are also doing an equity survey. And I think that is going to provide us with some data. And then I think we build a plan from there. And as part of what comes next, we bring that back and say, here's what this looks like. And then we start on that journey, similar to what we did with the strategic plan, to make that a part of sort of the, you know, the fabric of the district. And if we think back to where we were 5 years ago, RTI wasn't a part of the district, and it definitely wasn't built in the fabric. The use of data definitely wasn't. Even the strategic plan wasn't, because we had a strategic plan 10 years ago, and nobody really referenced it. And then the first year we had the strategic plan, nobody really referenced it. And it required us to really be intentional about, we have to change things. And if you look at the evolution of our presentations, you see every presentation always starts off with a highlight about the strategic plan, and then builds it. But those were intentional activities that had to occur, that come out of, you know, the board's desire to, yes, this is a priority. It's our responsibility to then turn back around and say, this is what it looks like. And oh, by the way, this is what it's going to cost. And I just want to highlight, when we did the strategic plan, we actually allocated $250,000 the first year for strategic plan initiatives. And then we kept going from there. It could be that that's part of what we do, that there are equity initiatives that would have to be, and we carve out a line item for that. But we also do it within reason, right? So, I think the goal here is not to spend. That's not what I'm talking about. But we allocate funds to make these types of things happen. But this is really about how we prioritize these approaches.
I see Devin's hand. Oh.
Yes, thank you. So I agree that this is one of the opportunities presented at this moment, and we should seize the moment and bring in culturally responsive instruction, train our administrators as well as our teachers in culturally responsive practices. And one of the reasons it's even more important right now is we as a community are separated. And so it's much easier, I think, when people are separated to perhaps lose empathy for others who may be different than you. And it's a really important time that we're making that part of our culture as an organization. There have also been racialized crimes and hatred directed toward the Asian American community right now. And we haven't really talked about that as a board, but I have heard from people in the community, you know, walking down the street and getting yelled at because they appear Asian. And that's not okay. And it's something that I think we definitely need to address. So it's a very important time for culturally responsive training and instruction.
So hearing from the board unanimously through nods and comments that this is a great opportunity, this is a lasting change. We began with the question, what might come from this as you're looking at embracing these new tools for instruction in the classroom and through distance, that you're explicitly and deliberately looking at themes of equity and cultural sensitivity. And as Devin said, for our teachers, for our administrators, for the entire organization. So it sounds like a resounding pursue it for you, Superintendent.
Yep.
I'm going to have my musician husband write some theme music for a format like this, because I just keep hearing the Brady Bunch music in my head, and that's not working for me. So we'll come up with some special school board retreat music, and I'll name it after you, the Mountain View Whisper. Maybe we'll give you, like, I don't know, rights to the music, and you'll get money every time it's played. So, okay, levity is a very difficult thing in a virtual format, clearly demonstrated right there. So
you just have to get real close to the camera with a big smile or laugh on your face for people to see.
Come on, I'm counting on you, Jose. God, work with me. That was my best one yet. Public engagement. So this is a district that I checked out your website, looked at all of your stuff, very impressive. Was very proud to announce how many times you met with various groups to collect their input, 82 of this, 92 of that, 105 meetings and so forth. I don't remember the details of it, but I imagine your public engagement has kind of dwindled a little bit. It has for all of us during this time. Moving forward, knowing that this board has now met in retreat and given direction to your superintendent to focus on community needs in the areas of access, teacher and administrator support, and the trainings that they need. Looking at a virtual summer school as a possibility, equity in instruction, culturally responsive design and execution. With that as direction, what are your thoughts on community engagement? And specifically from the board, what I'd like to hear from you and have your superintendent hear from you is, what does that look like to you? Because it's going to have to be virtual. So I think you're going to need to spitball a little bit as a group and then kind of come up with some thoughts on what a great community engagement is going to look like. Because we're not going to have y'all come to the, multi-purpose room to participate in group things. It's not going to happen. It's not even really going to be able to happen for your teachers necessarily. So maybe we could begin by talking about the importance of community engagement and what that looks like to you as board members. And I am going to, let's start with you, Ellen. Do you have thoughts on that? You've been on the board for a long time and you've watched engagement morph over the years, really. What does it look like to you?
So I'll back up and explain to you that we're a district where each of the trustees meets with the superintendent one-on-one at least once a month. So, and we don't know what everybody else is saying, but I'll say that one of the things I talk with Allende about is trying to do the most we can to hear from and get engagement from lower income Hispanic families. And one of the things I worry about when we, now that, we're all locked down and there's a lot of virtual interaction, what about the people who don't have internet access and they don't have computers? Mm-hmm. So it was always difficult to get fairly robust feedback from those families, and we've started to get some. We've built up our DLAC. It's a structure where the DLAC members take it upon themselves to be leaders and try to get input from people in their schools. But that's one of the things I worry about with community engagement. And on another end, I'll tell you, I am a huge fan of webinars. So I think we could still do a lot of, like Parent University, we could have speakers come in and just, show somebody. PTA Council is doing some of that with their speaker series. They're having webinars and, people are attending. To an extent, and this is happening with our School Boards Association, to an extent, we're getting more participation from people who normally don't participate because they're able to just, attend on their own time or attend, when it's convenient for them. So, it isn't all bad, but I think being able to make use of different mechanisms and thinking about all types of people that we want to reach. And, I'm a big proponent of using this time to continue, Parent University, those kinds of things.
Thank you. I don't see any hands.
Oh, I can go, Jose, please.
Jose.
You're muted.
Yep.
There you go.
Thanks. No, really. With public engagement, I also think about not just community involvement and participation and how that looks like within all aspects of our groups, like DLAC, PTA, school site councils. But I also look at the extracurricular events, like athletics, sports, right? Our teams and our music and the arts. How is that going to look like too, right? How will presentations of choral music be presented and our plays and orchestra? I think we have to look at that too. But I also look at public engagement as an opportunity for persons, especially during this time where, it's all new to us. People will react differently under stress, right? And then that's when you get like, you learn a lot about persons then, right? But I think there has to be a way for them to also try and feel like there's some sort of say for sure as to what they can do to help out. So outside of just approaching the board or one of us or the superintendent for ways to suggest how they can help, I also, or through email or what have you, I would also like to see if we can have some sort of subcommittee be created so that we can have public engagement as part of that tool of communication that we can have for them to tap into and be a part of outside of DLAC and school site council. And I'm not sure how that would look like, but I feel like there's got to be a way for people to be able to pitch in and say, hey, look, this is what I see and this is what I can contribute. I know thought exchanges are sent out, but is there a way that we can also have something formed so that we can have active communication from parents? And I'm not sure what the superintendent thinks about that, right? Or the rest of the board.
Devin? Thank you, Jose.
I agree with Trustee Gutierrez, and the board received an email from a community member about ways to equip parents to engage and support our community right now. I see our parents and caretakers as assets and allies. And there's many people don't have the capacity to support each other right now because there's a lot going on, but some people do. And I think the more that we can make information about the resources that are available, if we can make that information easy to access and have it on our website, even if we designated like, well, we may already have this. I haven't looked at the website today, and it keeps changing fast. I know we have like a resources toolkit area, but the more we can make that easily accessible and share that with parents and encourage parents to help each other, I think that's a positive. At Mistral, the PTA is trying to start a remote room parent program, and instead of a classic room parent, and that means, you know, the former room parents might not be able to participate because it might not be within their means at the moment, but remote room parents are trying to support the teachers in how they access and use the technology. And they're also trying to reach out to families that haven't interacted online yet and see what they need. We have SCEFs at our school site to do this, but sometimes it's very different when it's coming from a neighbor than from someone in the administration at the school. So the more we can make those tools and resources very clear and encourage parents to reach out and help each other. And like Trustee Gutierrez said, maybe there's a committee that we establish, or, you know, or maybe it was Trustee Wheeler who mentioned that, I'm not sure, but that there's, that we engage our parents as active support for the community at this time. I think there's real power in that. And it could be as simple as everybody take a list of 10 names and give them a call and just see how they're doing, right? Like just call the other people from your classroom and say, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Is there anything else you need help with? Man, this is really hard. I also think this might be a good time I don't think we've traditionally taken out ads in the Mountain View Voice, but I know a lot of people are accessing the Mountain View Voice for local news in this situation. And so when we do a thought exchange, or if we had some sort of virtual town hall or school level virtual town hall, something like that, this might be the moment to advertise on the Mountain View Voices webpage and say, hey, the district wants your input about, you know, be it virtual summer school or ways to support our community. I think that might be one avenue to take. I know we're active on Facebook and we have ads on Facebook, but it might be making some of, you know, doing some of that advertising there to engage people. I think that's all I have for my notes.
Thank you, Trustee Conley. Trustee Blakely?
Sure. I think the voice ads are very expensive. It's a great idea, but they cost a pretty penny. I know that helps keep the voice afloat, but I'm not sure that's the best place to, I mean, they're like $2,000. That is a lot of money. But I like the idea of doing, you know, approaching various forms of outreach. I also just taking it up one more level. Like I'm getting calls from city council people and community members about like, there's, you know, I have this great idea X, you know, and I keep kind of popping them by Dr. Rudolph, and I think he's getting a little tired of them, but I feel like, I don't know if we could use it or not. I wish there was some way, and maybe we can help facilitate, but to set up some kind of a community clearinghouse. Are you guys familiar with Free Cycle? If you want to get rid of stuff, you post it there, and the people that are looking for stuff, I've just used that as an example. That, but I don't know if there would be a way to establish some kind of a group with the city and, you know, key, you know, CSA and the Community Services Agency, CHAC, the churches, the police department, you know, a little bit like Challenge Team, but some way to do some kind of an online engagement so that people could kind of meet each other. Because I think, to your point, Ellen, about people are accessing webinars now when they maybe couldn't before, it wasn't convenient. I think people are also starved to connect. And so just trying to figure out a way, and I don't really know what that looks like, but I'd love to try to facilitate something with partners. I don't know if it's something we do just on our own, or maybe there's subsets just on our own. I like the idea of forming a task force or a committee to work on that. And you know, somebody else said the town halls. I know, like some of our local politicians Joseph Midian, Anna Eshu, they do these virtual town halls. I think I've actually never participated in one, but I think they're mostly kind of phone dial in. But maybe there's a way to do something like that, whether it be at the school level or at the district level, or maybe both. I don't have any, great one size fits all easy solutions. But I do, overall, I do think that engagement is important. And I think we've done a lot of things. The thought exchange is a helpful tool. Not everybody can access it, but I would continue doing that. And perhaps with the food distribution sites where people are coming, we have about 2,000 meals that we're passing out each weekday. Maybe there's some kind of way that we can post boards and, you text back this number if you agree with this. It would be simple stuff that, something like that could even be posted on the marquees at each of the schools. So sometimes they're like, if you, X or Y, text back this information. I don't know if there's particular things that you're looking for. Something like that might be easy.
I want to offer this thought. Thank you for all that great input. And I know we have not heard from the president yet, but I do want to offer this one thought to you. In the area of community engagement and communication as in general, and this is from working with boards for years now up and down the state, right? We tend to have a lot of ideas that aren't attached to a concrete objective. It's really important to be clear on what the objective is, because that will drive the tool. This is the area where we, and I say this having been a board member, we get into how before we clarify what and why. And so I think it's important for your superintendent to hear some of the themes I'm hearing come from you are, we want the community to know how they can connect. We want them to be able to be a resource, Devin said, to one another. How are they going to be resources to one another? We need to know what their needs are as well. I'd be a little bit careful about opening up the question, and I know you wouldn't phrase it this way, what do you want? Now that we're redesigning things, what do you want? Because you're going to really need to set that direction for what you want for the district, and then hear from your community about how you can best implement it and meet their needs. But I just want to say, in communication and community engagement, and it's not just for this discussion, you can keep this one because it's always true. And I see Peter Fagan nodding his head only slightly, but this is where we get into how before we really define what. And that's why communication often is why we feel like it failed, because we weren't really in complete agreement on what it was supposed to accomplish. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Tamara, and maybe you could share not only your thoughts, but the key themes that you heard your colleagues share here, President.
Yeah, thank you, Terralyn. One of the first things I wrote down right after the presentation under public engagement was this idea of change management. And I think what we're dealing with here is a massive scale change management. And the only way to do effective change in any organization is to communicate. So that's something that popped out to me. I'm not going to sit here and talk about how we do the change management, but one of the things that you do in it is you identify where your resources are, what's missing. You have to get buy-in, and we need community buy-in on this, because whatever we decide and whatever decisions we make are going to likely cascade forward for decades. It's hard to say. But part of that and part of the public engagement in my mind is managing expectations, because everything will be changing and how everybody is used to seeing and their comfort levels with the way education has been delivered in the past is also going to change. So we need to figure out, in my mind, in our communication strategy, how do we manage expectations? I don't know how to do that, but I think it's something we need to consider when we're framing the messages. Again, I think it requires access. So Thought Exchange is an online platform. Parents without access can't get to it. And Thought Exchange also is very much driven by the first few people who respond. I'll ask Trustee Gutierrez and Trustee Conley. I don't know if Trustees Wheeler or Blakely received these from the district, but I'd love to hear your insight on if you enjoy the platform or find it useful at all, because I'm honestly not a fan. But that could be another discussion. I don't know that it lets us get as much insight as we could maybe from a different avenue, but we may have a long-term contract with them. So I don't want to open up that can of worms. But it's sort of like people add thoughts, and then once they're there, it becomes a library, and then you star stuff as you go. So there can be fatigue by the time you get to the end, but that doesn't mean the good thoughts aren't embedded somewhere in there as well. So I think there's a change management piece, manage expectations. I think we have to figure out a way to do communication feedback loops. We need to set a message. We need to have the principals deliver it. I don't know if that's through principal coffees on Zoom, or if that's we set up chairs 8 feet apart in a MUR and require masks. I don't know what that means, but I think we need to make sure our site level people are delivering the message when we craft it. I think there needs to not only be email communication, you know, if it's a video from the superintendent, which I know we've talked about, I think the public would be very comforted by hearing a direct message from him about what's coming. And I know he's already agreed to do that, so that's kind of a moot point. But I think those types of delivery mechanisms, it's a unified message. It's delivering it across any platform available, and all the platforms that reach everybody, or at least they're available to everyone. Whether they utilize them or not is sort of outside of our purview. But so I think we have to have site level leadership, engaging parents and getting feedback. I love this idea of finding, I don't know if it's within the PTA or site council, some parent network where they can start gathering some of this information, like Laura is saying she's sending in bits and pieces, and finding like a resource utilization group who wants to figure out, you know, what's out there. Because in my mind, all of this comes down to the resources have always been there. I mean, they're not magically appearing. They're there, but now we're redirecting it. And I think making sure we utilize every tool at our disposal to redirect the existing resources. And again, that helps you identify that missing piece that then you go after in terms of fixing the problem. But I think I like the idea of the parent portal. Again, this is all interrelated back to access and the parent support network. We may need to have site level leadership call on PTAs to do that. There are certain things that I think are valuable and important, but they should be happening at different parts of the organization. And we're supposed to be at the highest level. So I don't want to direct any of that. I think we have a lot of tools at our disposal. It just is going to require a fleshing out of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Can I piggyback off of that real quick?
Absolutely.
I agree with you, President Wilson, that change management is a huge component of this communication. And within change management, over communication is sometimes the way to go. I don't know about the other trustees, but the County Department of Public Health is having bi-weekly. So there are 2 conference calls a week where public and elected officials can call in and listen on an update. They bring in different people who are involved with different issues in the community right now who share information. There's sometimes a short Q&A at the end. I don't want to say this is our how, but I want to point to the over communication, the fact that it's 2 times a week and it's consistent and it's available has been very reassuring as a public and elected official for me. And some people have some time on their hands right now, not everyone, but the over communication, if we look at, we want people to be so tired of getting communication from us, as opposed to people don't know what's going on. We just want to overdo it. I think that that's a way to go.
I agree, Trustee Conley. It's sort of like, I'd rather have them delete our communications because they've heard it before, like I sometimes honestly have done with the county's information, rather than go, we don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The keys to effective communication are, and I should tell you that my background is in communication. That's where my career began, marketing, communication, and crisis communication. And I've been doing this for 30 years, but I will tell you the keys are clear goals. So I'm hearing community engagement, effectuating systems change. But after that, for a school district, the key is consistent communication. People know when they're receiving it. All the superintendents in the state right now know when they're on the phone with Wes Smith at AXA, or we're here, we know the governor, God bless him, is saying press conference at noon, and we all know we can. So your superintendent said he left 60 minutes. He knows when it's on, what station it's on. We know, PBS, 6 o'clock, there's Judy Woodruff. The key is consistent, and the key is that all your folks know their role. And so this is hopefully helpful to your superintendent as he puts a plan together for you. And by that, I mean the board knows its role. What is your role in communication? Who are your responsibilities for outreach? What is the principal's role? We heard your president suggest that there might be a Zoom meeting with principals and their parents. That's tactical, but they know their role is to keep their community informed and to put something concrete in place. So I'm not going to repeat it other than to just say clear goals and consistent messages delivered at a consistent time. That will be the key for you to be effective with your comms. Yeah, President Wilson.
So I just want to say that in the past, I think we've done an incredible job of communication. So I think it's just a reimagining of the delivery mechanism and the creativity that'll go with that. It's not a whole new algorithm, because I know we have a communications algorithm in place, and I think that's equally effective no matter how it's delivered. So I'm excited to see what we come up with moving forward.
I do want to point out something that that was said at the outset, and that was from your veteran board member who said, I want to make, and I'm paraphrasing for you, but I want to make sure we're reaching everyone, all of our families. And I think that's going to be really important for you right now. It's probably why Trustee Conley brought up the newspaper as an outlet. That really is just, we just want to make sure that you're reaching absolutely everyone right now, not just those who are following you in earnest. So I hear that. I do think you're probably going to want to, not today, but you're probably going to want to revisit the committees that you have in place to make sure that there might be committees that can be suspended at this time. You don't need to have a club in search of a cause. You might want to look at new committees that you need to, Jose said, maybe we need a community engagement oversight committee, and they're looking at ways to connect people. So I don't think you should get into that conversation now. I think as your superintendent puts forth the next steps for how he puts legs underneath the priorities you gave him today, one of the things he could be looking at with you and for you is the committees that you have in place. You may even want to have a board task force, not again to be decided necessarily today, but as you move through the summer and planning, the superintendent's either going to need more time with you than you typically have calendared during the summer months, right? Usually July is diaspora, we're all somewhere else, but he will need either access to this board for a discussion like this, a spot check and moving forward, or a task force, which is something we're familiar with through more of a parcel tax or a bond or something where we're able to meet with the superintendent pretty nimbly to assist with his work. That's something you'll want to keep an eye on, and I address that to the full board, but specifically to the president. I think something you want to keep an eye on. I want to ask you a couple quick questions because I'm mindful.
Jose has a question here, Carolyn.
Oh, I thought you were just saying hi. Hi.
Hey, Carolyn, how's it going? So I hear what you're saying, but I would also like to ask Allende to, not that he hasn't been honest, but to just lay it on the line. And also, I mean, we have to remember there's only one Shelley, right? We only have one that I know of, one communications person. So is this the time now to, and I know we'll know more in a couple of weeks when Governor Newsom shares with us his ideas about where we are with the shelter in place orders moving forward for post May 3rd, right? But is this a time where we should also think about hiring someone to help out in addition to Shelley, right? And how do we look at that? Just like if we were to expand our Chromebook distribution, the possible need of having more tech members join the team. So if he could also provide us with that guidance or direction or suggestion, that would be helpful too.
Thank you. I can tell you honestly, working with the comms people in districts, sometimes we do feel like Dick Van Dyke in music, what was it, Mary Poppins, he's the one-man band. We're like, we're playing all these website, Zoom, we gotta go. And so that was a very thoughtful question. Thank you. For my colleagues up and down the state, I thank you. So resource. Yeah. Ellen.
Calling on me. Yeah. So just something to throw out there. And I hear about this all the time. A long time ago, we had something called the Communication Action Team. It was a district committee. It was made up of parent reps from each school. It had varying success, sometimes very successful, sometimes not. It went away and then it was reinvigorated and then it went away. I think some people would like the consistency of, the language of a reinvigorated communication action team. Something to think about.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing that, and I'm sorry, this harkens back to a little bit earlier that I forgot to mention, but it keeps popping back into my mind. I don't know about everyone else, but I've been getting notifications from summer camps for my son that they're being canceled. And so when we talked about summer learning, virtual learning, I think there might have been an assumption that it could be to close the gap for students who are highest need. But I think what we may see, because many camps and options are shutting down this summer, is that we have the continued need from families who are sheltering in place and working from home for learning opportunities for their children during the summer as well, across the board.
And I agree with that.
I agree as well. I mean, as a full-time working parent, and if they shut down the camps, I don't know. I mean, I have to work full-time with my son here. He's 9, so I trust him to go outside and let him have free reign, but it's going to be an issue for many, many families.
Laura, you had your hand up as well.
Laura?
Well, I'm confident it will be an issue for people, but I'm not sure how we pay for that. Given, and Jose is suggesting maybe we hire another communications person, maybe we hire some more IT people. I would be very cautious just in light of the budget conversation about hiring more people. I would, unless there's a permanent need, I'd be more interested if we were adding people to do it on a consulting kind of basis so that we wouldn't be incurring the expense long-term. But I'd love to be able to provide summer school or some kind of avenue, but I'm wondering if there's ways that we could partner with other organizations, maybe share our platforms and what we've learned, but have them provide the staff. Because I don't know how, historically we've had a problem based on what Dr. Rudolph has told me, having teachers not want to take on summer school because they were looking forward to the break. This year may be very different if we're all still sheltering in place. You talk about the hiatus in the summer, Terrell-Lynn, and we may all be very available. But I'm just wondering if there's ways to lever other resources because the equity reasons we can't charge even, I don't know how that would work if we charge the families that could afford summer school and not the others. I don't know. I just think that could be a very expensive proposition. Dr. Rudolph?
Shelley's on here now too.
Go ahead,
Shelley.
Hi there.
Hey, Shelley.
Hi, Shelley.
I know you've been listening to this too. And so maybe before I put my thoughts in, maybe you should talk about the amount of stuff that you actually do behind the scenes, and sort of give a perspective about what you feel like we may need.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thoughts around this being a different time and may require some different methods is right on. We're kind of moving out of crisis communication mode and into one where we're being more strategic about how we're going to approach our new normal moving forward. And if we have more resources, we can always do more, certainly, right? There's two things I think we would need to work on. And one would be making sure we're clear about our goals and our audiences, like Tara Lynn said. And then what will our methods be? And if we use different methods, say more video, more press conferences, you name it, having some extra manpower to help with those would be great. But that's not to say that we can't do it without those. We would just need to plan for more streamlined approach if that's kind of where we're headed. But yeah, we're already thinking about all these different methods and have a video project this weekend, right? Video wasn't in our primary mix, but it certainly is now. Does that help, Ayende?
Yeah, I think, you know, communications really is a two-person show. And so, and three, if you include either Kathy or Nancy, depending on the time. But at the same time, you're talking about, I jumped from working with Shelley on communication to working on a plan or addressing a particular thing. And then Shelley has to work on the internal stuff and maybe helping someone else who has this. And so I think it boils down to priorities about in terms of what we're really expecting. And it's not, I don't think there's not a willingness to create videos and to get these types of things done. But I do think that there is a capacity issue that we try to, and I think we do a pretty good job of creating all these items. And I would say for districts that are even larger than us, I think we pump out just as much information to them even as they do, even though we're maybe a fraction of their size. But I think, you know, at some point we're going to hit or we're really close to a point of diminishing returns just because we do not have the full capacity. Now, I don't know what that looks like. We cut back on the number of videos we produced last year as one of our budgetary reductions. You know, so maybe it's bringing a contractor back on. You know, it's hard to tell, especially, you know, back then it was you're bringing somebody into the district and they're making videos and they're doing this type of stuff. You know, when Shelley and I talked just recently, Shelley was like, you need to find a tripod in order to do the video because, you know, using your iPhone just isn't acceptable. And it sort of gives it a shaky thing. I think those types of things highlight sort of where we are, and a lot of, you know, I don't know how many more committees or meetings I can do. You know, and the same goes to, you know, some of the chiefs. And so I think there has to, you know, we can come back with a plan of action, but there has to be acknowledgement that something has to be prioritized if we're not going to add people. You know, just this week we have held DAC, PTA presidents. I've talked with all of y'all, some of you multiple times. I've called elected officials. I've been on like this. Yes, there is that, but yesterday we spent all day finalizing 3 presentations that are embedded in today's meeting. So I say that to say, and for all of those, even though Rebecca and Carmen worked on compensation, Shelley jumped in on the compensation presentation. Even though, you know, we worked on this one in terms of the communications, her and I did it back and forth, but Nancy created the algorithm after Shelley and I did it. So I say this to say it's doable. And I think there's some good points in terms of the goals and the methods and the consistency in terms of the times you receive it. I just think the more we do, the more there has to be an acknowledgement that there's going to have to be a carve out to add someone, because we're just at the point now where we're running a little bit on the thinner side in terms of getting things done. And we're not complaining about it at all, but you know, if you start adding additional things to meet these needs, twice a week meetings, where we're providing updates and information. I think that's great, but public health has a whole, I'm just using that as an example, Tammy, you don't have to shake your head. But, public health has they have a whole team that's dedicated to making sure those types of things happen. That doesn't mean that we can't provide weekly updates via video and that we can't purchase materials to get it done. It just means that it takes that setup requires editing and all these other types of things unless we always do it live. And that's just a consideration that we have to take into account. So I think it's doable. I just think it's doable within reason, unless you're allocating funds for an additional person that we can leverage to get things done. And I will say this, I'm certain Shelley, now Nancy, and I could probably sit down and talk about maybe we're not as efficient as we could be. And so there are some efficiencies that will allow us to produce additional results that didn't exist there before. And so I think that's my take on it, but I think there's some good ideas. I just want to highlight there's only so much time that we have, and a prioritization of what you want or what you're expecting would help us to develop an adequate plan for how we can meet that. So if you're saying, hey, we need to rethink the mediums that we're using, we need to find ways to connect with people. So I sort of wrote down five things. Then if those are the priorities, then we have to revise a plan around it. And I just want to acknowledge it could cost you. And I don't know what it's going to cost until we have a plan.
I just want to, yes, Jose.
Hey, so I'm looking at the agenda, and I am so sorry, but I thought adjournment, I think we passed our adjournment time of 12 p.m. So do we need to extend this meeting?
I think it's till 1.
Well, on this, it shows 12 p.m. on the agenda online.
It does. Let's show at 12 p.m. I thought it was until 1 too, so I think it's a typo, but it is on the printed agenda as noon.
Okay, so I move to extend the agenda till 1 o'clock.
Do you think we'll be done by then?
And we still have closed session.
So just a form of technicality, just in case you're wondering. Technically, you only need to extend the meeting if you go beyond 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Because that's what the board resolution states. In this case, if the meeting runs over, unless it goes to 10,
Got it.
You're actually good and you don't need to make a motion, but you would need to make a motion if you go to 10 because there is a board regulation that says that meetings end at 10 o'clock.
And we are not.
Thank you for the explanation.
Do people have a hard stop at 1? I'm wondering if we should kind of realistically more think about 1:30 if that works for people. And maybe that includes the close, Tamara. I don't know.
Yeah, I have to have like maybe 10 or 15 minutes before 2. He's got a soccer online training I got to get him set up for. But I mean, you guys could carry on without me if it comes down.
I think you have made your way through the overwhelming majority of your agenda. We're at wrap up for your retreat agenda. I want to offer a few thoughts on communication, just to bring this to a close, and final comments. And this opened with community engagement. The purpose of community engagement is to clarify your objectives, to keep people informed, to optimize your resources. I think as Shelley said, and she and I would both, we'd have said this, we said this independent of one another, we'll say it together. A good communications plan is very clear on its goals, its purpose, the audiences you need to reach, and you're measuring your effectiveness. And I think if you you've given direction to your superintendent to look at access. Now I get to summarize your direction from today. Access for all devices and internet. Maybe this means moving to a 1-to-1. You're looking at administrative and teacher support. You're looking at a virtual summer school, trauma-informed approach for teachers and staff and students, equity in your instructional design, culturally responsive themes for both administrators, teachers, and your community as a whole. Then we moved into community engagement. I will just say to you what you already know. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. And you just handed your superintendent, who is avoiding eye contact with me, an awful lot of work.
I was actually I had to charge. I'm writing notes on my iPad, so
I appreciate it. Yeah.
It's over here. Look, so I'll just.
No, that's okay. It's okay. I'm married. I'm married. I get it. But that's an awful lot of work, and you have a talented team, and they're going to do it for you. Shelley's charge will be to put a communications plan in place to help you achieve success with systems change and the operational changes and the change management, both internal and external. And I think if they need support to help execute that, they'll let you know. But I think that we'll let her hear from you what you shared, which is, as Ellen said, let's reach everybody, please, nobody left out. Making sure we're including our parent voices. There were a lot of ideas for how Shelley might be able to achieve this, but I think I will tell you, your communication work is exceptional. It is exceptional, and I'm not just saying that because I see Shelley's name down there and where Bobby Brady would normally sit in the Brady Bunch picture, but because it's really tight. It's effective, and I think you're going to get a good plan from her. So with that, I want to move you toward just a couple of housekeeping things, and then you've really wrapped up your retreat, unless there are other points that you all want to bring up, and you've wrapped it up in accordance with your agenda. I just want to make sure, as you're in this new setting, and I'm shifting now toward the last item on your item number 4, is the process for setting the agenda in the context of this virtual world. Is that still working for you, or do you need to tweak it in any way? I just wanted to make sure while you have this time together, we have a little room for housekeeping. Is there anything that it needs to be changed? There's some, and I ask because I don't know what process you have for setting the agenda. I don't know if typically the board president and vice president meet in person with the superintendent, or now you're doing that virtually. Is it still working for you?
For me, the process is working. I'm not sure if we're doing it different than other districts, but typically the superintendent and our board president meet weekly to talk about any outstanding items, any current or brand new issues that have arisen, and setting the agenda. So we go over the agenda planning matrix. We can look at the next board meeting and see what's on there. If something comes up and we think things need to be moved around, we do that. I've never done it with the vice president, and perhaps I've been doing it wrong.
There's no wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong. Right.
You did one when I was president and I brought you in at the end. So like the transition one, but.
Yeah, we did that, but it hasn't been like standard practice. But I think the process is working well. And at the end of each regular board meeting, we ask, is there a particular item that a majority of the board would like addressed at some future time and on some future calendared board meeting? And if 3 people say yes, then we ensure that gets on, or if we somehow that falls through the cracks, it ends up getting on there. But I think I'd rather hear from other board members what they feel about it, since they aren't as involved in the process. So if people have feedback. Ellen?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think the way we do it is, and I'm very used to it, I admit that, but I think it works real well. Regarding the president and vice president in the planning meeting, I was involved in that when we had a different superintendent for a short period of time, and I hated it. And the reason I hated it was, if you can only talk with one other board member, you're locked into that one board member. Whereas now, we have flexibility, and I can meet and talk with any of you about, an issue that I'm particularly interested in.
Okay, very good. And you're talking
I feel the same way as Ellen.
Okay.
I think it's helpful to be able to because of Brown Act, like I could talk to Jose about one thing and Tamara about another and Ellen about a third and Devin about a fourth. And I like that flexibility as well. So.
I just want to make sure while you have this time together, that you're able to take through a little bit of housekeeping as well. Be mindful that you may need some more summer meetings, Superintendent, and you're going to want to look at calendars for that. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying you're going to be moving through a lot of work. And with that, I want to make sure we leave time for any questions you have. But before we move to those and additional comments you want to share with each other, thoughts, I would be remiss if I didn't say that in this virtual world, the practical reality that we can, as individual board members, take a lot of time from our superintendent's day, if we're not careful, can really slip away from us and sort of get away from us, if you will. And 5 of us, maybe it's only 30 minutes with me and 30 minutes with Ellen, but it all adds up for him. So we need to be really careful that we're thoughtful of his time and mindful that only the board sets direction. So a good superintendent will hear direction in a call with a lot of worry attached to it. And by the way, I've not been front-loaded and asked to discuss this, and there's nothing I know other than I was a board member, and I know that this can happen to, and Peter does too, know this can happen to the best of boards. So I think you want to be really liberate your superintendent to say to you, I hear the worry in your voice, but this is starting to sound like direction. Should I take this to Tamara, and should we talk about whether or not this is something I should be doing? Because I will repeat, he can do anything, but he can't do everything. So, and you just handed him a lot of work. So yes, Ellen.
Yeah, so I'll extend that and say, I am used to trusting the superintendent and giving the superintendent a lot of freedom. So that's what I am comfortable with going forward.
Other thoughts?
Jose?
I just,
Laura's hands up.
Yeah.
No, Jose, I didn't.
Go ahead, Jose, I'll go next.
Go for it.
Well, I just want a clarification from Dr. Rudolph in terms of historically, you say you look at email once a day, maybe more, but once a day. But if there's anything that is urgent, that texting is the better way to reach you. And I'm just trying to clarify whether that continues to be true. And I don't plan to text you very often, but I'm just looking for clarification.
Good question.
Yeah, so I still hold on to the once a day email. If you notice, it always comes at the end of the day. Nancy and I have talked about she has access to my email and will make sure that I'm sort of aware of like if there's something that is necessary and I need to respond like immediately for. So that's going to be a little bit of a change. Text works, but you know, at times I'm not the greatest of texter, and at other times I'm really great at text. And I think part of that's just because of the amount of texts that come in. But I would say if you text and I don't get back, if you send something that brings it back, it sort of reminds me like, oh, this is what takes place. And then call if, you know, normally I know like I'll use Devin. She called, and actually Devin and Jose called earlier this week. It took me a couple of days to get back to them just because of the series of meetings, and I just forgot. And I was like, oh, I forgot to do this. And so as long as you're patient, let me know. But if it's an emergency, then I would say send a text, let me know it's immediate, I need a call kind of deal. And that sort of puts it to the top of the burner for me. But I think those processes sort of work. You know, it's just, and we're going to start back up. I'd send out a note to cabinet next week, back with our weeklies, the weekly written update that you get. So we're trying to bring a sense of normalcy back to our own structure that sort of been missing. But, you know, there's a couple big plans that we're going to have to create. And I would just simply say, like, I would just request, as Terrellyn has said, just be mindful that, you know, creating a virtual learning plan and the possibility of virtual summer school is a Herculean task if you had 9 months. Doing it within 2 months. And this is where I joke with our team all the time. This is one of the impacts of our success. We've done things so fast so many other times that people are just really, they just become accustomed to, like, you just created this in 3 weeks. Why can't you do something like that again? And it just takes a lot of energy out of us. So I think, again, going back, the system we have works. And so I would just say, just keep using that. And if you keep letting me know there's an emergency or something like that, over text, that would be the fastest way. And sometimes if you say it's not an emergency, that helps me to process and say, like, okay, I'll get back. Like, I think Devin did that earlier this week. It's not an emergency, but when you get a chance, give me a call. Then I know I have a little bit more time, and I'll try my best to get back to you as quickly as I can.
Thanks. I don't plan to text you very often. I just wanted to clarify that was, thank you.
It's not that I mind the text. It's not. You need to know I have my ebbs and flows with text also. So I'm really good and I'm really bad. I'm trying to get consistent.
I think the president had a comment.
I wasn't a comment on what Dr. Rudolph just said. I just, I'm not sure if when we had item, I guess it's now 3E, next steps. We've had all this discussion about equity and access and communication, and then we kind of had this new idea about virtual summer school. But one of the bigger pieces in terms of, especially if we are supposed to educate every kid, is this learning gap plan. And it's unfortunate. I don't think we have time today to talk about that. But I think it's a huge chunk of work that we haven't addressed. And I think I'm not sure how the trustees feel about prioritizing that over this year virtual summer school, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address that that's an equally sizable piece of this work.
So I would just say that I think before y'all weigh in, the learning gap plan is going to be embedded in whatever reopening plan that we have at this point. It will require us to think about this no matter what. There's just whether it's a virtual opening, a phased opening, like regardless of what that looks like, because schools have been out for so long, and the education we have been provided, it's optional to some degrees, and some families, because of means, are checking in, and other families aren't. We're forced. The worst case scenario is to plan as if every kid simply stopped learning in March, and whether they learned it or not, starting in August or whenever we open, we have to address that. So I think it's going to be embedded. What I plan on doing is embedding it within our whatever plan comes with it. The virtual summer school, I don't know what the feasibility of that is just yet. But it is, I think that will come over the next couple of weeks as we talk about it. I do think at some point there's a natural conversation as we bring this back about expectations. What works for in high school, you're doing summer school because you want credit, and you're being held to expectations. I think here, there's even if we don't do virtual summer school and we go into virtual learning next year, there has to be a conversation about grades and credits and what that looks like. That's going to be completely different than where we are right now, because we're dealing with an emergency versus, no, this is the new reality, or this is how we're going to open for the first couple of months, which means that there has to be a different type of expectation for everyone. Right. And I think that's a conversation we're going to have to bring back. But I need to do a little bit more research on what the impact of that is.
So Dr. Rudolph, what are your thoughts about the possibility of adding additional board meetings than what we've already calendared? I have a feeling that there's going to be a need for it. I don't know if that means a spillover into the summer. I can't see how it wouldn't mean that. But I think there's just a lot of moving parts here. And I would just like the public to know, I know you've talked internally about this learning gap plan, and I believe it's been mentioned in some of the district-wide communications, but just so we can keep the public informed, both through meetings and communications, I think it might be needed.
So I think we probably will need them. The only thing I would say is that cabinet did not take off last week or for spring break, except on Friday. And, because you're working from home, everybody's just working. At least I know I can't speak for everybody else, but I know the number of emails has not really stopped, and the number of things that I'm responding to seem to keep going. So I think at some point there has to be a consideration about how do we handle vacation, and not just for us, but also for y'all, or just time away to sort of, check out and then come back in, so that we keep our batteries fresh. And I would say that's the same for the board. We had the first virtual board meeting we had was 5 or 6 hours long, and it took a mental toll on at least on me. I don't know about y'all. So I think let's add meetings, but we're going to have to, from a mental health standpoint of the team, there just has to be a consideration about what does that mean in terms of work requirements, because all of us, and I was with my kids this weekend and I was still working. It's mentally taxing on people to have work that needs to get done and to have kids running around and trying to figure out, like, do I stop this and work with you, or do I just simply ignore you and keep going? And I think all of us are straddling that in different factors, even if you don't have kids. Let's add some meetings, but we got to figure out especially for the people who work our 12-month employees, we just have to figure out what that balance is. Because I have a feeling, for instance, Rebecca, Carmen, and I worked 224 days, but we haven't taken, normally by now we're coming close to, we know how many vacation days we have left. But now we're at the point where it may be hard for us, with everything that we need to do, to get rid of those vacation days. Plus, there's no place to go. And so I think there's a consideration for how that looks, but there's also a consideration for the board about how much more information can we continue to dump on the board and adequately get you to engage in a deep level like you are today, and not overwhelm you with the sheer volume of information. And I think these meetings have been good because the packets, the information you got, maybe 70 something slides, but there have been packets of information that you've received that are 500 to 600 pages of information that you have to go through. And we just need a good cadence or balance of all of that for all of our sanity. That's my very long answer to your question.
Jose?
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think the key is we have 4 meetings left, right? We got May 7th, the 21st, June 4th, and the 18th. So it's a matter of trying to figure out and prioritize of those agended, or those items that would have been agendized, which ones we keep and which ones we can afford to push back, if any. And then also figuring out along the way, if there's an update to what we spoke about today with any of this that could be given back to us within that period of time, that would be awesome. If it's done that way, or if we have to add on a date here or there, either in May or June, then we still leave July as the time we have away from one another, right, to regroup. But if we feel, or you feel that is, and the team, that you can't do all this by said June 18th deadline, then maybe as we get closer, then that's the time to think about whether or not we add on dates for July, instead of just doing that, ahead of time, where we may not.
Yeah, my goal in asking was really to plant the seeds of it could be a possibility. It wasn't by any means direction. It was just heads up, it may happen. I'm going to try my best not to. I mean, I have my son here with me constantly. So I'm not really excited about, doing the whole, you need to handle yourself for 4 hours while I have a board meeting. It was just to plant the seeds of it could be a possibility. It's definitely one we would prefer to avoid, but
Okay.
it may happen, and I don't want everybody to go, you didn't say anything, like how could you?
I want to offer this thought to you, and I know Peter has some thoughts he wants to share with you as well. I want to first say that you're a terrific team of people, very positive, student focused, very kind to one another, and it's really been a pleasure to have a little bit of time with you. I look forward to what you do. I think you'll be a model for others. That's my prediction. I'm just mindful that one of the things Jose said when you opened was, we live in this Apple, Google, I sent you an email, why didn't I get an answer? Move fast, break it, move. And so you're going to be a huge part of managing the public's expectations and helping them understand the priorities that you've set and why you're looking at gap, why you're looking at one-to-one, why you're looking at equity in access. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Parents who question why we offer 2 kinds of pizza and not 4, and why we don't have chemistry for 3rd graders. And you need to be able to articulate collectively and individually the priorities you've set forth and why, and defend them so the superintendent and staff can work. They're going to be paddling like ducks, smooth on the water, but paddling like crazy to make this happen. So I pointed out summer meetings, less summer meetings, just that every one of you will be busy during the summer answering questions and keeping your community focused on what you're doing and why you're doing it, and standing together. I think that's going to be more important for boards than ever. And that's our job. That's the outreach we owe our superintendent. We've set the direction, clear the path for him. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter. Before I turn it to Peter, I do want to say you're really a terrific team of positive, intelligent people, and you complement each other's thinking. And I think you're going to do some wonderful work for kids. So thank you for that. Thank you for that.
I'll Venmo you the $100 I paid you to say that.
Thank you, Terralyn, so much.
Why wouldn't you use PayPal, Jose?
Oh yeah, don't tell PayPal what you did.
That one caught me by surprise.
It's okay. We own Venmo. PayPal owns
Okay.
Venmo.
Okay. One of the things that several of the things that I was going to say, Terralyn just said as well, but I would echo what she said about thanking you for the opportunity to be here and to work with such a high functioning team. Just from this 3-hour time period, you can tell a lot from attending a meeting and working through some of these issues. Just a few wrap-up points that I was thinking of as we were going through this meeting, and they're coming from different sections of the meeting, so bear with me there. On the public engagement, and I'm thinking in not just public engagement of meeting with the community and receiving feedback from the community, but with staff as well. I know you've got a lean team, and your communications, you have one communications person, and obviously the superintendent does a lot of work in communications as well. But I think it's important to remember that all of you, board members as well as cabinet members, and even your principals, can play a key role in the communications process. And Terralyn touched on what should be coming out of this meeting, the priorities that you have all given to your superintendent. And I think it will be key for each of you to have those in front of you. And what I'm thinking of is talking points, so that in your communications with other public officials, with parents, even though you're not out in the community, I'm sure you're getting emails, I'm sure you're getting phone calls, that you still have some types of interaction with people in the community, and being able to speak with one voice as to the priorities that you've given the superintendent, and is one of the keys of enhancing the public's confidence in school district leadership. If you have a community member who talks to 2 or 3 different board members and they're all saying you have the same set of priorities, that speaks volumes, and that does inspire confidence. One other thing that I will mention in going through the binder that I had that was prepared for this, right here, it had a lot of information, and including pictures of all of you, so I knew what to expect when you showed up on the screen. But it also may not be completed by November or December, and that will carry over. I have no idea if all 3 of you are planning on running for re-election or not, but I'm sure you all know this, but if there's even one change in a member of the team, you have a new team. And you will need to reaffirm all of this and make sure that the new team is on board with these priorities moving forward. And that's probably going to have to occur in something like this in January or February, sometime before too long after new members of the team may be seated. And so that's something, I know that we could be in a whole different world by January, given looking back a few months to where we were. And so I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think that's something that the superintendent and the board members that will continue will need to keep in mind, that you've given some specific priorities here. And as you're unrolling and unveiling the efforts that are being made, you want to make sure that if there is a new team, that they share those priorities so that you have the same buy-in, you continue to speak with one voice and present that unity to your community. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you. It has been a pleasure to watch you interact and to participate a little bit, but I'm impressed with your team. And as like Terilyn, I've worked with a lot of boards over I guess it's 30 years now that I've been doing this and doing lots of governance retreats, and you all impressed me. And so I just want to commend you for that and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. Thank you also, Terilyn, and for all your facilitation and feedback and keeping us on track. We really appreciate your time and being with us today and helping us march along through these really tough issues. I mean, this is all unprecedented. So we're sort of hopefully thoughtfully stumbling forward together into unknown territory.
Yeah, relying on each other. I wish you great luck. I think this is the conclusion of your retreat. But I did want to say, as thank you for thinking as much about your teachers and your staff as you're thinking about students, because they're so sad they left and didn't get to say goodbye to kids, and they're bummed. And I say this because my husband is one of them. I mean, they're just bummed. And so thank you for taking care of them. And good luck. We hope you don't need us in the immediate future. That might not be good, but we're wind beneath your wings. So good luck to all of you.
But obviously, if you do, it would be a pleasure to work with you all, especially now that I've met you virtually, and it seems like a great district and a great team.
Thanks again. Thanks to you both.
Okay. Nice to see you, Ellen. So, we'll be exiting now, sir. Are we dismissed?
Dr. Rudolph, signing off.
Yep, they're more than welcome to go. You can stay and join for the next part, but you're more than welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks again. So it looks like now we'll move on to item 4A under review and action. And this is the tentative agreement with the Mountain View Educators Association. Is this Ms. Geisels?
This was 3A, Madam President.
But when we move things around.
Numbers.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. My bad. I'm sorry.
I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, that's my fault. I'm sorry.
You're on mute, Carmen.
Carmen, you're on mute.
Sorry, I apologize.
I think that's right. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Sign language.
Dr. Rudolph, did you want Ms. Westover and I to go into our presentation that we created? Okay. Rebecca, do you want to bring it up and then you and I can talk through it together? Would that be okay?
Perfect. Dr. Rudolph, can you allow me to share my screen? All right.
So before we present the tentative agreement to you, we wanted just to kind of give you tell the story about where we are and where we've come from with employee compensation. So if Rebecca, if you want to go on to the next slide. So currently, I wanted to discuss our process for negotiations. So in past practice, what we used to do is we would predict our assessed value to estimate the total revenue for that upcoming year. And this predicted number was used to offer a percentage increase for employee compensation. In other words, we would negotiate the year prior for the coming year.
And
go ahead.
One of the problems with this is they are simply predictions, and we can look back at 20 years worth of AV growth, and that won't necessarily tell us what to expect for the next year.
So then in 2018, 19 school year, we based an assumption that we were going to get a high AV value. So we offered at that time and agreed to and ratified a tentative agreement of 5% salary increase for all of our employees. And then unfortunately, the assessed value came in lower than predicted. And we had to honor our board approved tentative agreement with our bargaining units, but we also had to make some cuts behind the scenes to implement this increase. So starting this year in 2019-20, we use the actual assessed value data to negotiate our raises. And in this manner, it provides us with more accurate predictions and more accurate budget assumptions and predictions for our salary increases for all of our employees. So we're excited to bring to you a tentative agreement with our teachers union for 19-20. And again, this is only for this year, the 19-20 school year, which would be retroactive. And of course, our salary increases are within the board's policy of a reserve level of 17 to 20%.
So, and some things that have changed in the business department is we have a budget analyst that works with everything that we're doing that provides checks and balances. We meet regularly to develop and review our assumptions for the coming school year. And then large purchases such as our Chromebooks and textbooks come from one-time set-aside funds as opposed to the general fund. So that's a change from past practice. And we wanted to give you an idea of what the current district finances were, because I know that right now there's a lot of anxiety around COVID and what does that mean for our entire economy in general. It's been on the news quite a bit. Fortunately, when I'll get there in a moment, we are in a bit of an insulated position. So right now, all districts are being held harmless, meaning that the state's providing ongoing funding regardless if students are in session or not. And we all are also going to realize some savings. For example, we're not transporting kids right now. Our utility costs are less, and some overtime that we would typically pay, we're not paying. We have, on the other hand, we have some small additional costs of Chromebooks, hotspots, sanitizers, providing meals, and overtime for maintenance and food service workers. The good news is some of these items may be reimbursed later through FEMA, but something to keep in mind is this takes at least a year, if not 2 years. When speaking with other CBOs, when they were working through the FEMA applications for the big earthquake, they said it took them 2 years to see any funds come in. So just for us to keep in mind. We do have financial security right now because we're a basic aid district. We're $11 million into basic aid, so this is not going to change. Our average AV property value is $800,000, while our average sale price of homes is $1.6 million. So what does this tell us about what our future? So back in the Great Recession, we saw home values plummet. We're in a quite different position right now. Our county assessor feels very strong in where our home values are. And even if they were to drop a little bit, it still would not greatly affect our AV growth because the average sale price is 1.6 million, where the property value is only at 800,000. We are also a teeter county, which means that we will receive our revenue of property taxes no matter what. The county can take out loans in order to make sure that local entities get their property taxes. And then the benefit for them is they get to keep whatever monies, additional monies they collect through collections. And the raise right now is for the 1920 year is based on known assessed value growth that will not change. So what's coming forward in the future? History indicates that we'll not feel the true impact of COVID-19 for a few years due to our basic aid status. The raise being offered is for the current school year. And when we look out towards the future, our AV value may flatten, which will limit our ability to provide raises, and we may need to discuss freezing salaries. But these are charts that you've seen previously when Keejant came to present. If we look at just the history of our AV growth, it's been fairly strong. And then even during the Great Recession, we see that it took us a couple of years for that to really impact us. And according to Larry Stone, our assessor, he's not anticipating it to be the same type of impact because it's a different type of economic crisis. So our next steps. MVA has ratified their tentative agreement and it's on today's agenda for the board approval. The salary increase and one-time payments would be made on the May 30th pay warrant, as well as the one-time payment. CSEA is still in the process of ratifying, and we plan to bring CSEA's tentative agreement to the May 7th board meeting. And then, of course, we'll continue to monitor the effects of COVID on our budget. And then we wanted to see if there were any questions.
Questions from board members?
Is this the time to ask questions about the agreement?
Sure.
I'm trying to remember what was still under negotiation before. It wasn't just the salary. Did everything end up playing out?
So to answer your question, Laura, the entire collective bargaining agreement was up for negotiations because it expired. So what we have before you is the tentative agreement in compliance until June 30, 2022. So the agreement, we have tentative agreements on many different articles. We reached Article 3, which was ours, a tentative agreement for Article 5, compensation, Article 6, organizational studies. We just basically went through the entire CBA and cleaned up the language and made some renewals on some tentative agreements going forward. So did a lot of work, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions from trustees? And it looks like this is an action item. So I guess I have a question. What are we taking action on? That we have a tentative agreement because it's not a solidified agreement? Like maybe it's the language.
No, so the TA is actually, it's an agreement. So what the board has to approve the TA. And then that in turn means that the salary as well as the amendments to the contract are official.
Got it. Okay. Okay, do I have, if there are no more questions, I guess we need to open this up to the public for comment.
No one's there.
Nobody's there. Okay, good to know. And then we need to have any additional comments from the board. It looks like Jose. Oh, no.
I wanted to do the motion.
There is a public comment. I forgot.
Okay.
1 second. I need to read Chris
Mr.
Chang.
Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Rudolph, just as a point of order, when comments are emailed to the board ahead of the meeting with enough time for us to read them before the meeting, do they need to be read into the public record during the meeting? My understanding is that City Council in Mountain View cuts things off like a couple of hours or an hour before the meeting. So any comments that get emailed in after that get read, but the other ones, it's presumed that the council members, or then analogy to us would be that the trustees have read them and taken them into consideration.
I ran the process by, and it's unfortunate Peter got off the phone because I actually ran this process by him, but this would have been a great topic for you to ask. And he said it is perfectly fine. So because we don't have an open meeting where people could just come in and go, we set up public comments. And so because he emailed public comments at MVWSD,
okay.
and asked them to submit them before the actual meeting, and we will read the public comments. Had he just emailed trustees or emailed you individually, then I wouldn't read it. But because it was sent to public comments at mvwsd.org, we're going to follow the process to read it.
Thank you for clarifying. I wasn't aware of that.
So this is his comments. Dear Honorable School Board, I believe that MVWSD increase in competitive salaries is one of the greatest accomplishments. But given the very likely unprecedented drop in state funding next year, I urge the board to freeze all salary increases for every employee. As much as salary increase is welcome by our hardworking educators, anything to secure their job from future layoffs will be even more welcome during these uncertain times. Let's start padding the reserve for the coming budget storm. It will be a tragedy to pink slip educators next year because of spending this year. Sincerely, Chris Chang. Nancy, were there any other emails to public comments?
No, okay. Thank you, Nancy. And any additional comments from trustees? And I believe Trustee Gutierrez wanted to make a motion.
Sure. I move that the board approve the tentative agreement between the Mountain View Educators Association, MVWA, and the Mountain View Wisdom School as presented.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, on a motion made by Trustee Gutierrez and seconded by Trustee Connolly, the tentative agreement with the Mountain View Educators Association passes unanimously. We'll move on now to item 4B, management and unrepresented staff salary increase.
Typically, when we bring our teachers' contract tentative agreement, we would also like the board to consider for ratification the agreement of a 3% salary increase for our staff. As with past practice, we usually increase the salaries of our management team and unrepresented staff by 3%. And we have the proposed salary schedules before you. And management team would consist of principals, coordinators, and directors. Unrepresentative staff also includes confidential staff, classified, supervisory staff, and preschool teachers. So the staff is recommending that the board approve the attached salary schedules to reflect the 3% increase for the 1920 school year for those employees.
Thank you, Ms. Geisels. Are there questions from board members? Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so I submitted this question to Superintendent Rudolph. As you said, Ms. Geisels, we often give the same raise to other units that we did to the teachers. So my question is, since the teachers also got an off-schedule raise, will the managers get that same off-schedule raise?
We are preparing to do the same for our principals, our managers, our unrepresented staff. Yes, we plan to do that.
Trustee Gutierrez, do you have a question? No.
It's not listed in the cover sheet, but it is in the disclosure and included in the financial.
In the disclosure, right.
Let me see. I'm going to open it. Got it. Okay. Are there any other questions from trustees on this item? Are there any comments from the public? I'm seeing a no shake of the head. Any additional comments by trustees? Okay, may I have a motion?
I make a motion that the board approve the attached salary schedules that reflect a 3% increase for the 2019-2020 school year for the staff as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, on a motion made by Trustee Conley and seconded by Trustee Wheeler, the management and unrepresented staff salary increase passes unanimously. We will now move on to item 5, future board meeting dates. They're listed there. Hopefully we won't need to be adding any per our previous discussion. And I guess now we will move on to item 6. Correct me if I'm getting the numbering of this wrong, which is the opportunity for members of the public to address the board concerning items on the closed session agenda. Did we receive any public comments on that? Jose?
Yes, I'm sorry. I have a question, Madam President. For the future board meeting dates, are we also going to get or bring back the middle school schedule recommendation?
That is coming.
Go ahead, Dr. Rudolph.
No, go ahead, President Wilson.
Oh, I was just going to say, I believe we have it scheduled. I don't recall on which future date, but
okay.
You may have that agenda plan.
Yeah, our goal is DAC, who I met with, brought back one valid concern, which I touched base with. Laura actually got the final information for me. It was about the travel distance, so we just need to move it up by 5 minutes, and we should be good. So our goal is to bring back the feedback on May 7th, and with a final, and then with a recommendation, and then obviously for the board to vote on it on the 21st.
Thank you.
May I make one other comment on that? I know we want to leave it alone and not give everybody a break, ideally take July off, but we have suspended 1 or 2 of the meetings, and it just, with everything going forward, I would not want to err on the, like, let's not have a meeting, just, I'd like to keep open the option of having a meeting if we need to. I see the last one's June 18th. It would be possible, as appropriate and as needed, to schedule one in July or in June and still leave July open. So I just want to note that if it's,
what I
would
recommend, sorry.
Go ahead,
sorry.
I'm done.
I was just going to say, what I would recommend is that you actually just revisit your actual calendar of meetings for next year and add them in that way. I know that, obviously what you get is pittance. I mean, but if you add it as scheduled meetings that are agendized that people know, it provides a little bit of consistency that you were talking about. It also formalizes the process for the board as opposed to what we're doing now, which is we're calling special meetings, and special meetings are outside of the normal scope of the board. And it would make more sense that you do it within the scope of these regularly scheduled meetings, and you just submit it that way.
Yeah.
You're talking about for the 2021 year, or
Yep.
the current year?
So if you were to add meetings now, you're just adding special meetings. But if you want to be consistent and let people know that you plan on meeting, I would just go back to the governance calendar that you had already. And I would add, there's nothing that says you have to have 10 meetings. You just need to, for these meetings, they just need to be, you choose the days. So we could go back and say, here are the meetings in end of June, July, right? And you just keep a regular cadence that takes you all the way through August. And you could possibly get 3 to 4 meetings that way. And then there are official meetings where everybody's aware of what days they are, and they're agendized differently than what this meeting is agendized, because it's a special board meeting. And I think that creates some consistency, but at the same time, it recognizes that, you all need time to plan too, and it creates sort of a process for that.
So I noticed, I just quickly went back through the prior 2 years, because I seem to have recalled most of our board meetings start after the school year starts. And that's definitely something we need to have something before, and it could be a lengthy one, and maybe we can devote the entire thing to what we're doing and how we're going to do this. But yeah, I agree. We need to, I think this year it was the 23rd, and we began school somewhere in the teen dates. I can't recall which. Same in the year prior. Our first board meeting was after school opened, if you will. So yeah, I think we need to consider a meeting earlier in August at minimum.
Right, but you have to agendize that on this board meeting. So what I would suggest is, unless you're calling special meetings, just bring the governance calendar back and amend it and add dates there.
Okay.
And then from there, just change your governance calendar meeting.
Laura?
I'm just wondering if we needed one at the end of June, that's this school year, would that have to be a special meeting, or at our next May 7th meeting, I guess, could we amend whatever was approved to set the schedule for this year to add one in June?
So you can call, I mean, technically you could call a special meeting before your last scheduled one. I mean, you can call a special meeting at any given time. I think, considering what you talked about earlier in terms of communications and being consistent and letting people know exactly when something happens, calling it, and for all of us, right? Just saying on your schedule that you're just starting the governance calendar a little earlier, and just formally vote on what that looks like, that everybody's sort of in agreement, is a better process than calling meetings just, at the whim. It just in my take. And it gives us time for a little bit more planning.
I hear what you're saying about August and what Tamara said.
I'm not saying just August. You can do that all the way into after this calendar ends. You could start in June, July, and August. You can do all those.
Oh, you could do June after okay, I thought we went through June 30th.
But you're just starting the calendar earlier. So I'm saying for everyone's purposes, formalize it through the governance calendar, as opposed to doing to do this meeting, we do a doodle poll, and then we have to find a day that works for everybody, right? And then there's some negotiating that comes with it. If you set it as part of the governance calendar, everyone knows, and it becomes an action that the board has taken. There's nothing that precludes you from starting at the end of June or the week June 25th and going through the summer. You're just saying, as a governance team, the next year is going to start on this day.
Ellen?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask Allende, do you think that the number of meetings and the amount of hours of those meetings is enough for the work that you think you want to accomplish in these meetings by the end of the year?
I mean, we could come up with a plan by June 18th. I don't know if we can vet a plan by June 18th.
No, I'm just wondering, it sounds to me like you feel comfortable with the board meeting schedule that we have right now, and none of us know what's in your head about that. So I'm thinking, if you feel like the existing calendar is sufficient, then we should go with it. And then if something comes up, something that you want to add, you would have some flexibility if you want it, but otherwise leave it as it is.
Right. I would advocate for sort of what I've been saying just now. I think the 4 meetings we have are adequate, but I would say you open up revisit the governance calendar and you add the dates there. And I do think there's going to be a requirement to have more meetings, especially as you're moving closer to the start of the year, so that you can weigh in and make sure that we're on, provide feedback to make sure we're on the right path before we get to the start of the year. So my recommendation is not to call special meetings. My recommendation is to amend your the governance calendar and, and go from there. And that amendment also creates, if we get a summer and we're allowed to open up, right, then at least allows people to plan for their vacations and their trips around that. And even if you are, in the French Riviera, you can at least video in because when that meeting is going to be. So that's my recommendation. Leave the 4 you have. It's not going to be as meaty as they originally were, but add to the governance calendar that you currently have, and add in, even if it's June, July, and August, I would add check-ins there. Minimum once a month, no more than 2 moving forward, which would possibly be an additional 5 meetings.
I'm not going anywhere, so I'm happy to do whatever needs to be done.
Okay, so
Trustee Gutierrez.
that way, Dr. Rudolph, which sounds reasonable to me. I'm thinking, do we need to take action on this by at the latest June 18th? So would we have to present this as a topic to review by the latest June 4th and then ratify June 18th, or how would that process work?
So we can bring back an amended calendar to any board meeting, and you can just, because you've already, normally we review this once, and this is one of those items that doesn't take much debate because we sort of follow the same process first and third Thursdays, but you could move there. If you wanted to be on different days, then this would be the point. And granted, this hasn't been agendized, right? But if you wanted to change the days of the meeting, so you want it on Mondays instead of Thursdays, then I think that's just a conversation that has to happen at that meeting, and then we find the days. So if you're comfortable with us bringing days back, then we'll bring days back. If you are thinking you may want those meetings to be on different days, then I think this is the time to sort of weigh that in. So when we bring something back, we can take that into account.
Does that clarify things for trustees?
Yes.
Thank you. I would recommend that you work with Dr. Rudolph to come up with some days, maybe not that many. Maybe it's 1 in June, 1 in July, and 1 more in August or something. You guys figure out what you think is appropriate.
We'll figure it out for sure, and we'll make sure it's agendized and moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. So now I guess we can move on to item 6. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the board concerning items on the closed session agenda. Did we get any emails or public comment on that? Anyone on the phone? I'm seeing a shaking of heads. Okay. Okay, it looks like, I guess I usually adjourn the open session. It's not on here, but I will. We're going to move to closed session, so I will adjourn the open session of the Mountain View Western School District Board of Trustees at 1:06.
And I'm going to ask for a break between these 2 meetings.
Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break and re-adjourn at 1:12 in closed session, and that'll give Dr. Rudolph time to set us up in a closed meeting room. And it looks like you have to click join to get into that closed session, trustees.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nancy.